Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Danger Judgement Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. In the swirling darkness of an unreal landscape, a white-haired man cackled as four ghosts watched on with varying levels of worry. 4 ghosts, although there were 8 present in total. 2 of the others were off in a corner pouting, a third wasn't really conscious, or a ghost, but technicalities, and the fourth was, well, the one laughing. "You know," said the singular woman ghost, leaning towards the youngest-looking member or the group, "when I first got here, I couldn't see the resemblance, but now." The laughter cut off. "Why would you say something so cruel, Nana?" he asked. "I'm just excited for our new bearer. The 9th. You didn't act this way for 8th. Shut up then. You didn't act this way for Nana either," said an older man. "Banjo, how could you say that? I was thrilled when we were passed to Nana." "Not this thrilled," said the final, extremely tall ghost. "That you're laughing like." He paused, thinking. "A witch, maybe? And why are 2nd and 3rd like that?" He waved at the pouting ghosts. "Yeah, you guys can't possibly be that annoyed over Lil 9th, can you?" asked Nana, loudly. "You can't possibly be that angry that Toshi decided to pass us on, even though all for one's dead." 2nd and 3rd did not respond. The other ghost started to chuckle again. Nana's brow pinched. "Seriously, do you guys know something we don't? 2nd? The Yoichi. It'll be better if you find out later," said Yoichi mysteriously, while Nana muttered better for who. "Now, where were we?" "Checking 9th stats and starting to plug in the stockpile," said N. "Right you are. Let's just..." said N. "Oof," said Banjo. "I knew I had a bad feeling about this." "What is it?" asked Nana. "I don't see anything that would stop the stockpile from enhancing him, or from, well, stockpiling." "Okay," said Yoichi. "You know how you broke your arm the first time you used the quirk? Yeah. A green bone stress fracture. Didn't that happen to all of you too? Everyone but Tashinori." "I mean, not to me at first," said Yoichi, "but yeah. Thing is, if 9th uses it, he'll powder his bones." "Hikage." "What? It's true. But all the training he and Toshi did." "It probably won't powder his bones," said Yoichi quickly. "Probably. But it'll break them in badly if he can't regulate the flow, and he doesn't have that thing that'll let him do it right off, like 8th. We'd have to ramp it up slowly, so his body gets used to it and starts to develop countermeasures, like we did for you." "And you still broke bones," added N. "And he's about to take the practical exam in, what, a few hours?" Nana drew her hand down her face. "Damn it, Toshi, you couldn't have given it to him last week? Would a week really have made a difference?" "Not helping," and the ghost stared blankly at nothing. "So, either he takes the exam quirkless and probably fails, or we give him enough power to use, and he possibly cripples himself." Banjo slumped down in a chair that hadn't been there a second ago. "That Esikas." Nana frowned at the quirk, trying to see what the others were seeing. "What if," she said, slowly, "we didn't give him the stockpile?" "That is what we're discussing," said Yoichi. "No, I mean, we have more quirks than just the stockpile. Look." She pointed in a way that was more metaphysical than anything else. "What the hell?" said Banjo, jumping from his chair. "Are those dash?" "Our quirks?" asked N, edging closer for a better look. "Those were not there before." "Looks like one for all hit singularity," said Yoichi, quickly, in a way that wasn't suspicious at all. "Are you sure dash?" started Hikage. "After all, there's nothing else it could possibly be." "We can't give him too many," said Nana, slowly, remembering some of All for One's victims, "but 2 should be fine. 1 of ours now, and the stockpile later. He and Toshi will probably just assume it's 9th's original quirk that just showed up late." "Wait," said Banjo with dawning delight. "Does this mean I can give the kid Black Whip?" He started forward, only to be physically restrained by the others. "And oh!" they shouted in unified alarm. Don't you feel how much repressed rage Ninth has? Demanded Yoichi. That's why it'll be so good. It's like you want to kill him. Nana clapped her hands. Okay, people, we have until the end of the written exam to figure out which of our quirks is most likely to help Ninth pass without permanently scaring and possibly killing him. Black Whip's out, said N, contemplatively. Sorry, Banjo. No, you guys are right, said Banjo, waving it off. That leaves Float, Smokescreen, Danger Sense, F.A. Gene, and Dash. Don't you dare give him our quirks, shouted Third while Second glared silently. What is your problem? Snapped Nana at the once again unresponsive ghosts. We have Float, Smokescreen, and Danger Sense. Said Haikich. It would be easier if we knew what the practical was, said Yoichi. But we don't know how long this will take. I passed with Float, said Nana, but I also knew I had it and how to use it. Flying-type quirks often took an extra layer of training just to get the right mindset. Yeah, the kid thinking he'll have super strength and focusing on trying to activate it might be a hurdle here, agreed Banjo. At least Black Whip is pretty reflexive. N. Much like Banjo, I would love to pass on my quirk, but... He sighed. I am well aware of my quirk's drawbacks. It might give him more trouble than help to find himself with it without warning. Come on, said Nana. Between the 5 of us, we've got to be able to find a way for a kid with a heart of gold, abs of steel, and nerves of anxiety to pass a test. Anxiety, said Haikich. I have anxiety dash. Don't say it, warned Banjo. Super anxiety. Banjo launched himself at Haikich, who dodged easily, and they started to tussle. Actually, said Nana. Haikich, I think you have a point. Izuku had been nervous all day. Who wouldn't be? This was only the most important test he had ever taken in his entire life. If he passed, his dreams would be in reach. If he failed, visions of All Might's disappointed face danced in his mind's eye. He'd been catastrophizing all day. What if he couldn't use One for All? What if he was kicked out for being quirkless? What if he tripped and fell and broke both his arms and had to go to the hospital and missed the exams? Thank goodness for that nice girl who caught him with the floating quirk. It was so cool. She was so cool. Izuku was so lame. But that didn't explain why he was mentally calculating the likelihood of things like the roof collapsing or the light fixtures falling on him or the doors crushing his fingers or... He needed to stop. He wound through the crowd on the way to the auditorium, hyper-aware of possible collisions and the possible results thereof. If he got hurt before the practical, what would they even have to do for the practical? He'd done research online, but the information he found was conflicting enough for Izuku to suspect a misinformation campaign on UA's part. Maybe there'd be robots, or they'd fight teachers, or they'd fight each other, or there would be a race, an obstacle course, a maze. One particular post had claimed that they'd had to stand in front of a panel of heroes and demonstrate their quirk and its potential effectiveness in different fields of heroism. For obvious reasons, Izuku hoped the last one was false. He finally reached the auditorium that the practical orientation was going to take place in and slid into his assigned seat, only to be hit with a wave of fear and a sense of danger so intense it made him nauseous. Kaken sat down next to him. Maybe we shouldn't have given him a quirk that makes anxiety worse. Yeah. Izuku's nerves were so bad he could hardly read the handout in front of him. At least, he was able to absorb that the exam would involve fighting robots. Which was terrifying, but somehow not as terrifying as a hypothetical panel of judges. Present Mick's exuberant arrival and continued presence made Izuku feel a little safer, enough to let his thoughts linger on something that wasn't Kaken right there, because surely even Kaken wouldn't do anything to him with a pro-hero right there. Of course, Izuku's relative relaxation meant he was called out in front of literally everyone for mumbling, and he spent the rest of the time between then and arriving at the test stewing in mortification. And sweat. He could admit to himself there was a lot of sweat involved. After practically jittering off the bus, dread buzzing in his ears like a swarm of flies, Izuku decided he needed to find some way to distract himself from his nerves while waiting for the test to start. Eavesdropping, quirk analysis, interestingly shaped gravel, anything would do. It was the girl from earlier, He narrowly dodged a large hand and twisted to see the scary boy from earlier, the one who had called him out in the auditorium. The boy blinked once, with faint surprise, then launched into a lecture about not distracting others. Some distraction. Static seemed to build under his skin, urging him to get ready, get ready, get ready. The sensation swirled with that of mocking eyes drilling into him. The faux city loomed menacingly. Begin. With all the pressure on and behind him, Izuku shot off like a cork. He was soon outpaced by students with mobility quirks, and shortly after that realized he had no idea what he was doing. He rolled out of the way of a one-pointer that broke through a nearby wall. How to fall properly and how not to break his hands with every punch were the only combat techniques All Might had had time to teach him, and, despite a spike of trepidation, brought up his fist. "Smash!" he shouted, plowing his fist into the side of the robot and breaking his hand. Like an idiot. All Might's quirk use instructions sure left something to be desired. En patted Yoichi and Nana on the shoulders consolingly. "I think it's just sprained." Yoichi covered his eyes. "I can't watch." The next second saw the robot destroyed by a laser blast from another examinee who made what was honestly a rather hurtful comment about Izuku not passing. Which, fine, his prospects didn't look all that great right now, did they? So, from then on, well, apparently a decade of getting bullied kicked in because he was dodging robots like a pro, but that didn't matter because dodging did not give him points. He yanked another boy out of the way of a two-pointer scorpion tail, levered a piece of rubble off a girl's arm, experimented with throwing rocks at a three-pointer to distract it from a crying mouse-eared child, and then ran from said three-pointer for what felt like miles but realistically couldn't have been, interrupting several fights, uncornering two separate groups of students, and briefly riding a two-pointer like a cowboy. He still hadn't destroyed any robots. Unless he could get points for tag-teaming that last two-pointer. Personally, he doubted it, considering the other anti-cooperation rules, but he wished he'd been brave enough to ask. More troubling were all the friendly fire close shaves. He knew no one was actually trying to hit other people, that would get them disqualified, but it sure didn't seem that way. On his mad flight from the three-pointer alone, he must have warned, pushed, or pulled half a dozen people out of the way of their own or others' quirks, a fact that frightened him far more than the robots. Thankfully, only one had actually hit Izuku, and it was a relatively non-harmful sticky thing. The less said about his encounter with the invisible girl the better. Izuku wasn't even sure how he knew she was there. Then the ground started to shake. An earthquake? For some reason it didn't freak him out any more than he already was. Even when the absolutely enormous robot emerged from behind a skyscraper. He should be running now, shouldn't he? And try to get some points so that All Might wasn't completely disappointed in him. A spike in anxiety and a horrible but commiserate spike in what was shaping up to be a nasty headache made him turn around just in time to see the nice girl put her foot down in a crack in the road, fall, and then get partially pinned by rubble. All with the giant robot bearing down on her. "Ow," she said, just audible over the noise of all the other examinees fleeing and the destruction caused by the robots. Izuku changed directions. On reaching the girl, he put his whole weight up against the boulder and shoved, revealing the girl's rapidly bruising leg. "Can you dash?" She shook her head. "I'm stuck." Izuku grabbed the end of her shoelace and pulled. "Leave your shoe." This did the trick. The girl was up and running, or at least stumbling away. Izuku made to follow her, but abruptly realized he was stuck to the boulder by those stupid purple sticky ball. Izuku could not, in fact, lift the entire boulder. He had one recourse. Clench his butt and hope one for all deigned to work for him this time. Before he could attempt to break his hand even more, however, a hand slapped the boulder, imbuing it with enough buoyancy to float above the ground. "Come on," shouted the girl, pulling him along. "Your quirk is really cool," shouted Izuku back. They managed, barely, to stay ahead of the zero-pointer until Present Mic called time and they both collapsed on the ground. "Well," said Izuku, after the girl released the boulder from her quirk. "I'm not going anywhere." The girl nodded, then turned to vomit. "Oh my gosh. Are you okay?" "Yeah," she said weakly. "Quirk overuse. I'm fine." Thanks for coming back, by the way, said Izuku. You too, she said. I'm Uraraka Ochako. Midoriya Izuku. It's nice to meet you. Why yeah, said Uraraka. How do you think you did? I got 28 points, I think. Izuku wilted as much as the sticky ball would let him. Didn't get any. Oh, said Uraraka. But you saved me. That has to count for something. I guess, said Izuku. You know, you don't have to stay here, I know I'm a downer. And kind of annoying. Oh, well, I don't think so. And I'd stay anyway, but I think I messed up my foot. Sorry. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. They were too tired to say much else until some teachers came to help Izuku get free. The air in the mindscape was subdued. All of that, said Nana, and he still broke bones and didn't get any points. And we exacerbated his mental illness. What kind of heroes are we? I still think it was just a sprain, opined Inin. UA has stupid tests, said Yoichi, lying on the ground and hugging a pillow. Izuku showed he has the soul of a true hero. Making a heroics test all about combat is stupid. Stupid UA. Stupid tests. He fell to muttering. Wow, said Nana, there are some pretty nasty threats in there. Also, why are you calling 9th Izuku? I thought the policy was numbers only until we meet for real. Yoichi rolled over. 8th looks happy, said Haikichi. The 5 ghosts turned to the last, silent, not quite a ghost. He did indeed look happy. Hey, said Nana, approaching and grabbing on to the sides of 8's face. What do you have to be happy about? What's going on in that fluffy yellow head of yours? Maybe he bribed the principal into letting 9th in anyway, suggested Banjo. Or not, he said, raising his hands in surrender as the others glared at him. But, man, I wish there was some way to cheer the kid up. I got in, whispered Izuku without comprehension as he stared at the projected screen. Fat tears wobbled down the side of his face. Then the screen changed to a leaderboard, and I got the highest score? Man, bribery has limits dash. Tashinori didn't bribe anyone dash. Izuku expected his anxiety to subside, one way or another, once the exam was over. As always, the universe set out to prove him wrong. Home was more or less okay. But, for some reason, minor household repair issues started to bother him so much he spent the rest of weekend working on them. Then there was school, which was even more hellish than usual, despite being exactly the same as it had been since the sludge incident. Izuku was way too aware of how much of a threat everyone there was to him, specifically. Especially the teachers. His hypervigilant state did keep him from getting poked, smacked, quite so much by the teachers, or cornered by fellow students as much as usual, but it also led him to hide in the library storage room. He'd never be able to look at the librarian the same way again. Not knowing she kept multiple copies of books by anti-quirkless hate groups on hand. And all through the week, he got nothing but silence from All Might. But the end of the week came, and with it a letter from UA, which told him, "What do you mean, first place?" I don't know, Nana. Banjo makes a good point. Don't take his side just because he was your predecessor. You all know a one-for-all holder would never resort to such devious. Yoichi, why are you making that face? In an unjust world, bribery can be a tool for justice. I'm sure 8th didn't have to, though. That's it, I'm not talking to any of you anymore. Anyway, said All Might, wiping blood from his mouth and glancing nervously at the other beachgoers. Congratulations, young Midoriya. Izuku felt his lip wobble. You're not mad that I couldn't use one for all? Not at all. Actually, in some ways this might be better. We'll have some time to experiment privately. And if you're in school when it finally turns on, well, we'll just say you're a late bloomer, all right? Okay, sniffed Izuku, rubbing his eyes. I couldn't use it. What if dash? Hey, it's all right, my boy. No need to cry. You passed the entrance exam without using a quirk at all. You should be proud. Even with a quirk, it's an incredible accomplishment. Also, just so you know, I had nothing to do with the selection process. Just in case you were worried about favoritism. Izuku sniffed and nodded. What a strangely specific denial. Banjo, usually I'd be reveling in the chaos, but I think Nana is seriously considering ghost murder right now. Maybe you shouldn't insult her kid anymore? You and Hikage would protect me, right? Don't take this the wrong way, but I'd sell you to Satan for 1 corn chip. So would I. It's been way too long since I've eaten. As long as it is Satan and not all for one, you've got my blessing. You certainly proved this old man wrong. You aren't old, protested Izuku. We'll have to agree to disagree on that, said All Might. Here, sit down with me, he said, settling on the sand. Izuku hurried to follow suit, and for a while, they both just watched the ocean. It was nice today. I owe you an apology, young Midoriya. For what I said on that roof, said All Might, and for what I implied later. You already apologized for the roof, though, said Izuku, confused. I mean that day. That's what I'm talking about, said All Might. I shouldn't have, the way I apologized when I offered you 1 for all. It was like saying that you couldn't do it without a quirk, that you needed a quirk to fix yourself and, well, obviously I was wrong. Quirk or not, you're going to be an amazing hero. Oh, said Banjo, I can already tell this is going to be a problem once he finds out about danger sense. Gonna blow a hole right through his confidence. Maybe he won't find out, suggested Nana, who'd wrestled her murderous impulses into SB Emerson. Temporarily. Danger sense is pretty low-key. I feel like I should be offended, said Hikage. But if I got offended, that would be offensive to people who don't have quirks. I don't know, said N. If someone insulted your legs by saying they were so skinny it was like they weren't even there, would you being offended be offensive to people who don't have legs? Or would the original statement be the offensive one? Somehow, I feel more offended after that. Oh, said Izuku. He felt himself crying again. Are you? You're not going to, are you? Do you want it back? He whispered. 1 for all. No, of course not. There's no one I'd rather have it. Even if you didn't, you could be a hero. But I'm hoping you'll keep it. Izuku swallowed and nodded. All Might awkwardly raised his arm. Do you mind if I? Sure, said Izuku, not entirely sure what he was asking. All Might put his arm around Izuku and gave him a sort of sideways hug. Izuku leaned into it. It was the safest he'd felt since the entrance exam. Because, surprise, that anxiety hadn't gone away. What did you say? Oh, it isn't important, it's nothing. It didn't sound like nothing, said All Might, concerned. Ever since the entrance exam. Maybe even a little bit before? I've been really jumpy about everything. I think it's just because I'm a wreck, but well, that could be a facet of 1 for all. Really? After I got 1 for all, it seemed like it was easier for me to tell when people were in danger and needed help, said All Might. A friend who knew about 1 for all used to joke it was my original quirk. But it was subtle and intermittent, not constant. Said Izuku. So, it might have been 1 for all along? Trying to get me to help people? He picked at his lower lip. Maybe. I noticed a bunch of stuff I usually don't. I'm not sure I would have seen all the people in trouble during the exam. So much for not noticing Dash. His confidence. Let him have it for at least a little while. He seems to be taking it all right, said Yoichi hopefully. I'm sure you would have helped them if you did notice, regardless, said All Might, and that's what was really being measured, so my earlier point still stands. Izuku nodded. It would be really strange for a quirk to have 2 completely different applications like that. Yes, but 1 for all is a rather strange quirk, and I've seen odder split quirks. He fell silent for a moment. I can't think of a way to test for it, though. Speaking of which, we should find some time to try and work on 1 for all before the school year starts. How do you feel about coming to UA after school? Thank you for helping us with this, Recovery Girl. It's no trouble, dear, said Recovery Girl. I'd be here at this time anyway. You wouldn't believe the amount of paperwork I have to go through. Just try not to break too many bones. Izuku nodded vigorously, still somewhat in awe of being in the presence of not one but two incredible pro heroes. And at UA, it was like living in a dream, except for the highly suspicious, mostly hidden wall panels and the very intense feeling of being watched through camera by an incredibly threatening being. It was fine. All right, young Midoriya. Are you ready? Why yeah. Then come at me, Yuzi. Nana stared at her armor, student in despair. Toshi. Out of all the people. So, you admit he can make bad decisions dash. Bad and immoral are two different things. I think calling people zygotes is pretty immoral, actually. Silently, Nana agreed. Izuku blinked at All Might not because of the Z thing. Okay, partially because of the ZYGT thing. But mostly because he was still in his skinny, prone to coughing up blood form. Are you sure? Izuku asked. What if he trailed off, blushing. What he was about to say sounded so stupid and more than a little conceited, but, hey, even like this, I'm much tougher than I look, young Midori, Lee. Tashinori, don't you think role-playing as Gran Torino is a little much? Asked Recovery Girl. Do you think so? Recovery Girl shot All Might a truly terrifying look, but Izuku's mind was on something completely different. Is Tashinori your name? He asked, awed. Blood drained out of All Might's face, making him look more skeletal than usual. Should Izuku not have asked? Was it supposed to be secret? Oh no. Please tell me you haven't been training this boy for most of a year without him even knowing your name. Oops, said All Might faintly. He did do that, didn't he? Asked Yoichi, his eyebrows almost touching his hairline. Nana, your boy is a disaster. All of us were disasters. We're still disasters. I'm not. Hikage, you spent most of your adult life living in the woods, completely isolated from humanity. I know it was great. Unbelievable. Back to what we were talking about before, said Mr. Yagi. Mr. Yagi. Izuku knew All Might's name, and had permission to use it, after Recovery Girl was done scolding him. Focus on actually hitting me before worrying about accidentally hurting me. Today, I just want to get a baseline. Next time, we can work on basic punches and throws. So, do I just dash? Yep, just come right at me. The next hour consisted mainly of Izuku being thrown bodily into various padded surfaces. Despite this, according to Mr. Yagi, he was much better at dodging than expected. As a bonus, although he certainly felt sore and bruised, he didn't break any bones. He also didn't manage to activate one for all. Not even a little bit. Nor did he on any of the other days leading up to his first day as a student at UA. Aizawa Shoyuta, down 2 nights of sleep and dreading the new batch of bright-eyed hero hopefuls he'd be teaching and crushing the dreams of next week, glared blearily at a computer screen. Currently, it displayed a student's name, a quirk name, and the single least helpful quirk description he'd ever seen. Which was saying something, because he'd seen Hizashi's original quirk description. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk. Undetermined. Description. None. I am either too tired or too sober to deal with this, decided Shoyuta. However, sleep simply wasn't on the table, and getting drunk was illogical. In that case, simply not dealing with it was the only option. Nevertheless, he picked up his phone and called Nizu. Good evening, Aizawa, said the internally chipper maybe rodent. Or should I say good morning? Midoriya Izuku. You're browsing your class list, I see. Any thoughts about their potential? Illogical. It would be to make a call about a student's potential without meeting them first. Quite so. Midoriya. Quirk, grunted Shoyuta, reminding him why he was calling. Yes, he is a strange case. He's listed as quirkless in the registry. That woke Shoyuta up, just a little. He'd seen a handful of documents for the quirkless over the years. If Midoriya was quirkless, his file should read N.A., not undetermined. What? I have reason to believe that he might have been diagnosed in error, said Nizu. I am still investigating. In the meantime, I would appreciate it if you kept an eye on him. Assuming, of course, that he isn't expelled. Shoyuta grunted and hung up. He minimized the window on his computer and pawed through his files until he found the entrance exam video for Midoriya. A kid who passed the UA Hero Course practical entrance exam either entirely quirkless or with a subtle, stubborn, or invisible quirk on rescue points alone. A kid who seemed to run straight for danger on purpose, mostly on purpose, Shoyuta amended after seeing him collide with the invisible girl, coincidentally pushing her out of the way of some sort of water pressure quirk. There was just no way he could have known she was there. A kid who had almost certainly faced brutal quirk harassment since the time he was 4 and most likely possessed the self-confidence and trauma to match. "Least he's good at dodging," muttered Shoyuta. He rubbed at one grainy-feeling eye and pulled his sleeping bag closer around his shoulders. Kid wasn't all that bad at falling either. Some light martial arts instruction, maybe? He paused the video and reopened Midoriya's file, flipping to school and admission records and exam results. He usually didn't look closely at this part of the file. It was enough for him that the students passed, but exceptions. Speaking of exceptions, Midoriya's file was a mass of contradictions. Unusually high written test score that didn't correspond with middle school grades. Dozens of citations and black marks on his disciplinary record that should have kept him from even being invited to take the exam, but a letter of recommendation from All Might. He frowned at the last one. There was no way. He shook his head and clicked on the link at the bottom of the file. It brought him to a HeroTube video about a year old. A hostage situation with a vaguely familiar middle schooler and slime-like villain. Also, a bunch of heroes, but none of them seemed to be addressing the suffocating child. Shoyuta felt his lips curl. Even if this was in the past. Then Midoriya Izuku ran into the frame and tried to pull the other boy free, just seconds before All Might arrived and punched the villain so hard it started to rain. Then the video ended. Shuta's admittedly currently less than razor-sharp mind presented him with two possibilities. 1. Midoriya was All Might's secret child and All Might had bribed Nizu into letting him take the exams despite his less than stellar records. 2. This child had, with bloody fingernails, managed to claw a single spark of luck out of an otherwise bleak existence by impressing All Might enough that he got Nizu to ignore the otherwise damning records. If the first, well, he had still passed the practical without use of any obvious quirk. He probably had some potential. If the second, Shoyuta had been a hero long enough to recognize the circumstances that drove people to desperate, and sometimes unforgivable, acts. Dangling a single hope in front of someone only to snatch it away at the last minute. Forget the maybe quirk. This was the real conundrum of Midoriya Izuku. The rat knew he wouldn't expel Midoriya with these stakes. It would be the height of irrationality, even if he did turn out to be All Might's kid. What a pain. He flipped through a few more profiles, quickly reviewing 1B as well, before hitting redial on his phone. "Calling again so soon?" asked Nizu with a squeaky chuckle. "I want Monoma." He paused. "In my class," he elaborated. "Oh, whatever for. If I'm going to have to figure out Midoriya's mystery quirk, I want to make it as easy for myself as possible." There was silence on the other end of the mic, and Shoyuta checked to see whether or not he'd hung up accidentally. He hadn't. "I must say," said Nizu finally, "I had not considered that solution. Depending on the mechanics of Monoma's quirk, I cannot think of any reason to deny your request." That was a strange way of phrasing it. "We'll exchange him with Bakugo in that case." "Not that I'm complaining," said Shoyuta, "but why him? Why not?" He racked his memory. "Mineta. He's got one of those body part quirks Ken likes." Nizu chuckled again. "Normally, I would pick Mineta, but by my calculations, a classroom that contained both Monoma and Bakugo would be demolished within 30 minutes of their arrival." Shoyuta groaned. Why did they even let people like that in? No, wait, he had an answer to that actually. "Forget a mouse, a dog, or a bear," said Shoyuta. "You're a sissy." "Some certainly think so. But one thing's for sure. I'm the principal." The door to Class 1A sure was big. And intimidating. And radiating a faint sense of malaise. But then Izuku's middle school classroom had done far worse so. He opened the door. No Kaken. Thank goodness. He must be in the Class B then, because there was no way he'd let Izuku beat him to school. The strict boy from the entrance exam was there, though, and oh dear, he'd noticed Izuku and was coming right for him. Oh gosh, and the invisible girl was here too. He felt himself blushing furiously. Still better than Kaken. "Hello," he said rather loudly. "I'm from semi-private academy. My name is Ida Tenya." "Oh, I'm from Aldra Middle School," said Izuku. Was stating the name of your middle school a normal thing? He hadn't read about this in any manga. "I'm Midoriya Izuku. Pleased to meet you." He moved his arm in a rather robotic fashion, taking a deep breath. Oh no, was he about to yell at Izuku again? "Danger sense isn't even going off right now, Izuku," said Yoichi, despairingly. "Why are you still so nervous?" Maybe we never really gave him danger sense after all, and it was his natural anxiety the whole time. "Please stop denigrating my quirk." "Midoriya, you perceived the true nature of the practical exam. Meanwhile, I was blind. I misjudged you. I hate to admit it, but you were the superior candidate." "Oh, that was nice, but I didn't perceive anything though. I had no idea. Rescue points were a thing. I was mostly just trying not to die." "But that curly hair. It's Midoriya." "Oh, Uraraka? Please, let him have remembered her name right." "Yeah," said Uraraka, smiling brightly. "Too cute. I'm so glad you're in my class. I was so worried I wouldn't know anyone here." "Why, this is Ida, by the way," said Izuku, trying to get attention off of himself. "Nice to meet you, Ida." "It's nice to meet you as well, Uraraka." "Yeah. So, we've got the entrance ceremony and guidance sessions today, right? I wonder who our teacher will be. They're all supposed to be pro-heroes, right?" Started Izuku, that dash. "If you're here to socialize, then get out." "That's a teacher, huh?" said Yoichi. "Why are you saying that like you've never seen one before?" asked Banjo. "I've seen teachers before," said Yoichi. "I've seen all of your teachers. The ones you've had while you had one for all." "Okay, now you're saying that like you've never had teachers." "Yeah, that is kind of strange, Yoichi," said Nana. "I had professors," said Yoichi. "Still weird. I went to college. And med school." "Did you graduate?" asked N, interested. "No. Why not? My brother kidnapped me, kept me in a vault for a while, and then I died." "I didn't know what I expected," said N, shaking his head. "Wait, weren't there several years between the vault and the whole dying thing?" "Yeah, but I'm ignoring them. Because..." Banjo hooked his thumb over his shoulder at second and third. "Yep," said Yoichi. "Todoroki, you were the highest scorer on the recommendation exam. See how far you can throw this ball with your quirk. Stay in the circle. Anything else goes." A boy with white and red hair stepped forward, scowling faintly. He took the ball and stared at it. "Time is valuable, Todoroki." And then there was a glacier. Izuku felt his jaw drop. How was he supposed to compete with that? "My name is Monoma," said a blond boy, offering his hand. Izuku stared at it a moment before remembering handshakes were a thing. "Midoriya," he said. Monoma then offered his hand to Uraraka and Ida as well. "I look forward to experiencing UA's superior brand of education with you," he said. Izuku laughed nervously. "You're confident," he said, glancing at the track where two other students were doing sprints. It would be their turn soon. "But of course." Monoma struck a sort of pose, fingers splayed out on his chest. "I welcome this sort of challenge, this opportunity to prove myself. It just goes to show, UA only accepts the best of the best." Monoma was called away to the starting line a moment later. "Two good, one dud," he mumbled under his breath. What did that mean? Then Monoma was at the starting line, and he was using Ida's quirk. Did he have a copy quirk? That was so cool. Is that what he meant by good and dud? Did he see that Izuku didn't have a quirk? No. What if he told everyone? Even if people were being nice to him now? "What's wrong?" asked Uraraka. Said Izuku. "Nothing." "Oh gosh," said Yoichi, crying. "I just want to wrap him up in a warm blanket. You deserve friends." "Yeah, kid, it'll be okay," said Banjo. Bakugo's just a freak. And so was your whole school. Place gave me MLA flashbacks. Sure glad they aren't around anymore, agreed N. All in all, Izuku didn't do terribly. Especially given that he didn't actually have a quirk, and this was a quirk assessment. At least, he didn't think he did. At least, he hadn't tripped or hurt himself. It had in fact been a rather good day. No kaken. No bullies. The teacher had clear standards and requirements, and he stated them up front. He had been getting bad vibes from the short, purple-haired kid, and he'd noticed other people frowning at him, especially the girls. But he hadn't been able to put his finger on why, even though he had been watching him carefully during his turns. Other than that, he really was the best. By the way, no one's getting expelled. It was a logical ruse. Monoma raised his hand. What is it? I must object, said Monoma. Want someone to be expelled? In fact, I insist. To allow this to continue would blemish the reputation of the school. Well said, Monoma, exclaimed Ida. Living up to the reputation of UA and all the alumni who have come before us is a duty of us students. But what blemish are you talking about? Surely, as Mr. Aizawa said, we all went plus ultra. Maybe so, but my concern has more to do with moral standards. If you kids keep going like this, I'm just going to go to sleep. You're giving me a headache. Izuku caught movement out of the corner of his eye, and a wave of unease went through him. He turned to see. Hey, what are you doing? He demanded, shocked and more than a little horrified. Once again, he was mortally embarrassed on behalf of the invisible girl. I wasn't doing anything, said the small purple boy. You were looking up her skirt. It isn't like there's anything to see. The invisible girl gasped and quickly moved away. Gross, she said. That's terrible. See? See, said Monoma, wildly. This is what I'm talking about. Next time, said Aizawa, get to the point faster. Time is valuable. Mineta. What? You're expelled. What? You can't do that. Go complain to Nizu. It really was the best. Midoriya. Hey, never mind. He was doomed. Completely doomed. Monoma. I want to talk to you after class. The rest of you are dismissed. Izuku stood nervously as Uraraka and Ida bid him goodbye. Was this it? Was Aizawa going to expel him after all? At least it wasn't in front of absolutely everyone. But what was Monoma doing here? Speaking of which, Monoma looked nervous, too. Was he okay? Surely, Aizawa wasn't going to expel him, too. Is this about me using other people's quirks? Demanded Monoma. Because you said anything goes. I wasn't cheating. You can't expel me. There was some trauma there. Izuku could tell. Did people make fun of him for his quirk? I'm not going to expel you, said Aizawa, looking up at them from where he laid in his sleeping bag in the grass. He almost looked like he was praying for patience. I need to ask you some questions about your quirk. For future reference and to better serve your needs as a student. I know how tricky meta quirks can be. Oh, said Monoma, slightly deflating. Then he sent a curious glance at Midoriya. Is he dash? His matter is slightly more sensitive. If you would like me to send him away while we talk, I can do that. No, it's fine. Monoma sniffed, his eyes suspiciously wet. What's the question? You copy quirks through DNA contact. Do you decide when to activate passive quirks you copy, or can you choose? I can choose as long as it's within my time limit. When you first make contact, can you tell what quirk a person has? Monoma shook his head. No, sir, I have to activate it to do that so I can get duds. Oh, that is to say, quirks I can't use because I don't have the proper activation conditions like Midoriya's. He's got some kind of stockpile. I can get duds without realizing it. But I can tell whether or not someone has a quirk. Were you able to test all your classmates' quirks today? Not everyone yet, said Monoma. I usually try to avoid more extreme mutation quirks outside of controlled conditions. Aizawa's head bobbed up and down minutely. Great. That should be enough for now. You're dismissed. Yes, sir. I look forward to seeing your superior lesson plans tomorrow. He paused. Midoriya. Have a good day, Monoma. Monoma had felt one for all. What a relief. Izuku had been half worried he'd lost it somehow. But why did Aizawa want him? Sir? He asked. Sort of asked. Sir, alone wasn't a question, even if it was said in an inquisitive tone. Aizawa's eyes turned red, and his hair started floating. Izuku felt calmer, somehow. He was no longer vaguely aware of how the light post over there could fall on him, or any of the other many minor dangers surround him, and oh gosh, he was no longer aware of the dangers. How was he supposed to stay safe like this, when he felt like he'd been blindfolded? Aizawa blinked. Everything came back. Wow, said Izuku. That was so cool. Was that your quirk? Is it an emotional quirk? It made me feel calmer at first, but then I don't know, too calm, and it made me anxious, but then dash. Problem child, said Aizawa, and Izuku froze at the reprimand. What I just did was erase your quirk. Erase? His quirk? Oh my gosh. Your Eraserhead. I'm a huge fan. Aizawa closed his eyes. Was he counting? Did he fall asleep? You do know you're listed as quirkless, right? Yes. But you just had a reaction to my quirk that a quirkless person definitely should not have. Oh. Combined with Monoma's ability to sense your quirk, I'd say you are not, in fact, quirkless. But I have the toe joint? Izuku wasn't sure why he'd said that. He shouldn't be arguing against this, because, as Aizawa had said, he did have a quirk. It just wasn't exactly his. Yeah, that's an old wives' tale. Really? As real as my quirk counselor license. Whoever diagnosed you was a quack. Oh. My initial impression from your entrance exam video is that you might have a sensory quirk of some kind. On the other hand, we should take Monoma's assessment into account and consider stockpiles. Either way, I would like to schedule some time to test things out with you. You do that? For me? I mean, I don't want to be a bother dash. This is literally my job. Yeah, I guess so. His previous teachers would have considered it a bother. Except Mr. Yagi, but Mr. Yagi wasn't really a teacher. He was more of a mentor. Or a dad. Oh no, he did not just think that. But bad brain. Bad brain that read too much All Might RPF as a preteen. Besides, even if your quirk doesn't have many applications in hero work, it will be useful for you to know what it is and how it affects you. Aizawa yawned. Also, don't tell your class that I'm Eraserhead. Okay, said Izuku. Of course, sir, but why? I have 2 full-time jobs. I get my entertainment where I can. You can go now. We'll schedule tomorrow. Izuku nodded and Aizawa just zipped his sleeping bag the rest of the way closed and rolled over. Was he just going to go to sleep here? In the middle of the field? Mr. Aizawa? A grunt came from the sleeping bag. Isn't this kind of a dangerous place to sleep? Go home, problem child. Okay. Wait, shouted Nana abruptly, as Izuku was talking to his weirdo teacher. I know who that is. Quick, get ready to turn everything off. Turn what off? Asked An. We live in a formless mental void. We don't even have electricity. The quirk. That's Eraserhead. Oh yeah, said Yoichi, while everyone else, sans second and third, scrambled to grab onto the quirk. I remember meeting him now. So, he's a teacher, huh? How do all of you forget the one person who might be capable of one-shotting all for one? Demanded Nana. Doesn't his quirk not work on mutations? Stop daydreaming and get over here, Yoichi. The quirk space began to glow faintly, ominously red, and the ghosts pulled hard on the quirk, holding it temporarily out of Izuku's reach. Then, the red glow abated and they dropped it back into place. Well, that was exhausting, said Banjo. So, we'll have to be constantly ready for that, huh? As long as he's around, yeah, said Nana. Why did we just do that anyway? Asked En. So we can continue to masquerade as a normal, non-haunted quirk? We could have just let him think he didn't have a quirk, or that the anxiety dash. Super anxiety. Isn't part of it. Yuichi gasped as if scandalized. You'd want us to lie to Izuku? Okay, seriously, what is up with you and 9? Asked En. Despite not having a body, Yoichi began to visibly sweat. Nothing at all. I just think he's neat. If you're going to lie to us, can you not do it with Archaeomemes? Asked Nana. No, actually I can get behind this, said En. Would you say Izuku has vibes? Yoichi nodded solemnly. Young Midoriya. Izuku shrieked and jumped back from the sudden sound as All Might emerged from an otherwise innocuous bush. Both of them froze, staring at each other. Are you, said All Might, hesitantly, sounding much more like he did in his small form than usual, all right? I think so. That's good then. All Might coughed slightly into his fist. I was wondering if you had a few minutes. Of course, said Izuku immediately. Then allow me to lead the way. All Might led him through a door labeled, staff only, and immediately deflated. All the staff know about my condition, explained Mr. Yagi. Izuku nodded. Then a thought occurred to him. Mr. Yagi? Yes, my boy? Why don't you teach, as Mr. Yagi? Instead of as All Might? Wouldn't it save your time? Mr. Yagi stopped and scratched his head. I hadn't really thought about it before, he admitted. But part of the reason I took this job, other than wanting to help train the next generation of heroes, of course, is that I want to get people used to the idea that I am going to retire. He tugged on one of his bangs. Also, I'm not sure if my qualifications to teach are quite up to par without my reputation. I'm sure it would be fine. You're the best, after all. Mr. Yagi chuckled. I'm glad you think so, he said. Then he reached behind him and opened a door. In any case, my office. Wow, said Izuku quietly, stepping in. All Might's office. Who knew when he'd get another opportunity like this again? He kept his eyes wide to drink in the details. The rather sparse details. The office was rather bare. Which made sense, seeing as All Might was a brand new teacher. It was sort of disappointing as thrilling as it was. Mr. Yagi sat down behind the desk and gestured for Izuku to take one of the other chairs. It had a lot of cushioning. A lot. Izuku sank down into the fluff as Mr. Yagi fiddled with a drawer on his desk. He got the drawer open and pulled out a notebook. A notebook of the same brand Izuku liked to use, actually. Since your experiences with One for All are so different from mine, I thought it might be a good idea to do some research into past holders and take a leaf out of your notebook, as it were. He passed the notebook over to Izuku, who took it with shaking hands and a slightly open mouth. I'll treasure it, he declared, voice wobbling. Not so much that you don't use it, I hope, said Mr. Yagi. As it is, it's only an overview. The earlier holders, especially, don't have many records associated with them. Consider it a starting point. I haven't had much time to work on it. I can't believe you found the time to write this at all, said Izuku, flipping through the pages. The information was sparse, but each holder had a basic profile, all the way back to the fourth. I mean, between being a hero, training me, and preparing to be a teacher, I'm stunned nothing fell by the wayside. Mr. Yagi proceeded to turn a very interesting color. Nothing fell by the wayside, right? Why don't you take a few minutes to skim through? If anything jumps out at you right away, we can talk about it. And then I'll let you go get changed and go home, and we can discuss more later, after you've had more time with it. Okay, said Izuku. He'd start with just the basic profiles. Name, date of birth, date of death, quirk. Wait, those ages. They all died young, he said softly. Hero work is dangerous, said Mr. Yagi, hand going to his side. There's something else, isn't there? Not something you need to worry about. I took care of it years ago. The hand holding his side spasmed slightly. 6 years ago? Asked Izuku, aware he was pushing his luck. But this sounded both important and relevant. There was a long pause. Yes, said All Might finally. A villain with a longevity quirk. Had a history with the first user. Izuku got the feeling that was an understatement. It also seemed unlikely that the only application of the villain's quirk was longevity, given what he'd done to All Might. But the subject was clearly making All Might uncomfortable, so he dropped it in favor of burying his nose in the notebook again. Social fumbles aside, This was the most secure Izuku had felt for a while. The sixth user had a smoke quirk? Yes, it seems so. Although it doesn't seem to have been actual smoke, but a biological compound. I wonder if that has anything to do with all the steam you release when you deflate. Actually, he flipped back through the quirk. I wonder if you're using float too, subconsciously when you jump. What? I mean, said Izuku, I noticed when I grabbed your ankle and also in videos of you, your hang time is kind of messed up. You're in the air for longer than you should be, but it isn't, like, consistent. Plus, you can change direction mid-air, which I thought was because you were shooting out blasts of air pressure with your quirk, but with me on your ankle, you definitely didn't do that. There was a forum I was on where some people thought your quirk tapped into magnetic fields, somehow, but that doesn't make any sense, because you'd expect a lot more electronic interference and that similar locations would produce similar results, given the Earth's magnetic field, but they don't. But subconscious, low-level use of a telekinesis-based flying quirk would explain everything. If we take into account what you said about my anxiety after the entrance exam, then that's minor expressions of 3 out of 4 of the quirks listed here, not counting the base stockpile and enhancement quirk. Do you think the unknown quirks of the second and third users might have partially manifested for you as well? Have you experienced anything else that's atypical for a strength enhancement quirk? Mr. Yagi stared at Izuku. Oh no, he'd gone too far. Nothing immediately comes to mind, my boy, he said faintly. But magnets? Really? I told you it didn't make any sense. Mr. Yagi rubbed his chin. There might be something, but it's too unclear to say either way. I'll keep an eye out. It's just a lot to take in. I thought One for All was done surprising me. When has it surprised you before? Oh, under the influence of certain mental quirks, you can wind up hallucinating the previous users. Hallucinating. Yes. But being under the influence of a mental quirk is always the larger issue, so. Mr. Yagi, said Izuku, that's really the kind of thing you should let people know about up front. Is it? The ghosts all stared at Nana. Hey, don't blame this on me. None of us explained that kind of stuff before passing One for All on. In our defense, said Anne, half raising a hand, we were usually dying when we passed it on. More importantly, said Hikage, do you think Ninth is right about the quirks? It would make sense, mused Yoichi. Although then we'd have to wonder why Black Whip didn't manifest similarly. Is it too much for me to get someone to use my quirk? My extremely awesome quirk that has no downsides. It is powered almost exclusively by rage. No downsides. You dash. No. Downsides. Aizawa passed him an envelope labeled Quirk Counseling along with the standard schedule and orientation packet he was handing to everyone else. It didn't look like any of his classmates had noticed, though, for which Izuku was grateful. He didn't want to be known as a weirdo who didn't know what his own quirk was. He heavily suspected he was tapping into danger sense, somehow, but he didn't know how, and the fourth user of One for All had lived so long ago there weren't any records of him. Not easily and publicly available. Everything Mr. Yagi had written in his notebook, that Izuku had probably stayed up way too late reading. And texting Mr. Yagi about it. And comparing it to his notes. And texting Mr. Yagi about that. And reviewing old All Might compilations and theory threads. And having Mr. Yagi threaten to call his mom if he didn't go to sleep. About the fourth user had been retrieved from the journals Mr. Yagi's mentor had passed down, according to one of the source notes in the margin. Mr. Yagi had really neat, small handwriting, which Izuku wouldn't have ever expected from his large, dramatic signatures as All Might, and his notes were meticulous and carefully cited. If Izuku didn't know better, he would have thought it belonged to a secretary. But despite Izuku's suspicions, he didn't actually know. He didn't know its range, what it defined as danger, whether or not it ranked dangers, how to distinguish it from normal anxiety, or, well, anything really. And he would really like to. He opened the envelope quietly. Inside was a handwritten note instructing him to pick one of 3 schedules for quirk counseling and return it to Aizawa by the end of the day. The other pages were printed, with times and possible locations. Options for both before and after the school day. Izuku felt his eyes tearing up. This was easily the nicest thing a teacher had ever done for him. Although he was nervous about being alone with Aizawa. Some of his other teachers, when they asked him to stay after class, it was not good. Nothing bad happened, not like in movies or TV shows or the awareness videos the school had shown sometimes. The teachers didn't hurt him, really, didn't do anything to him other than talk or yell, mostly, but it still wasn't good. Maybe he could ask Mr. Yagi or Recovery Girl to sit in. But he already felt bad, taking up so much of their time. He picked one of the after-school schedules. He was already staying late on the other days to work with Mr. Yagi, and if something did go wrong, he wanted to have the night to recover before he had to face Aizawa again in class. He put it to the side, so he'd remember to give it to Aizawa before he left, then looked over the class schedule. Homeroom, math, hero art history, and English in the morning. At least this morning. The history classes alternated with something called Heroics Applied Science and Hero Law and Ethics. Afternoons, meanwhile, were entirely occupied by hero basic training. And every class would be taught by a pro-hero. He wondered if it would be rude to ask for their autographs. Shoyuta grunted as Hizashi flopped down onto the couch next to him on the couch in the staff break room. What a morning! I just love seeing all those bright little faces at the beginning of the year. Anyone have a favorite first year yet? Shoyuta kicked Hizashi through his sleeping bag. Sadly, this had no effect on the man. I think mine might be the little green guy. He's the only one who was actually paying attention, and you know how rare that is, when everyone is anticipating their first heroics lesson. The rest of us just pale in comparison. Shoyuta attempted to kick Hizashi again, this time for an entirely different reason. Midoriya was already All Might's favorite, probably. He did not need more pull with the staff. I know who my least favorite is, said Kansas, kid certainly dedicated and competitive, but I wouldn't be surprised if he threatened his middle school teachers into giving him those glowing reviews. His personality needs a lot of work. How did you get Nizu to saddle me with Bakugo, anyway, Eraser? I had nothing to do with it. Don't give me that, I was going to have Minoma. At least he's a team player. You're being illogical, said Shoyuta, zipping his sleeping bag closed over his face. How about you, Nemuri? Asked Hizashi, cutting off Vlad King vs. Eraserhead round 500. It's hard to choose. They're all so cute and eager. Full of the passion of youth. I think they're all my favorite. You always say that. The door opened and closed. All Might. What about you? Any favorites yet? Yagi coughed. I've only had the one class of third years so far. Don't you think that's rather premature? What an incredible non-answer. How did that first class of yours go, anyway? They didn't sour you to the whole idea of teaching, did they? Not at all. The students were wonderful. The third years are very advanced, aren't they? For some of them, I wouldn't be shocked to see that skill level on an active sidekick. What can I say? We start them off right, crowed Hizashi. They did seem a little surprised by the scenario, however. So was I, to be honest, said Snipe, who was in charge of the third years. Was it no good? It was fine. Lesson plan was a bit rough around the edges, but you and Nees'll be going over that later. But quirk traffickin' doesn't quite seem like your thing. Well, set pieces, he said, using the slightly derisive underground slang for large-scale spotlight hero battles. Maybe what I'm known for, but before my injury, the majority of my battles and investigations weren't publicized. Shield laws? Asked Nemuri. Generally, yes, but some of the investigations were tied to others, so we were using the organized crime secrecy laws to keep those under wraps. Simply put, my popularity isn't the only reason I keep the #1 spot despite Endeavor having more completed cases than me on paper. Shoyuta had known there was more to All Might than punchy, over-the-top, eye-strain-causing, bombastic muscle guy, but part of his stupid, illogical brain was annoyed at Yagi for pummeling that image into imaginary dust, anyway. It seemed like the man's only two flaws were horrible interpersonal skills when not using his public persona, and his vast suite of health issues, the latter of which all heroes who operated long enough picked up. Oh, and a possible inclination towards bribery. made it hard to dislike him, which Shoyuta wanted to do, because he was loud, flashy, and gave him headaches, literal and metaphorical. He ignored the fact that Hisashi was the same way, and had forcibly become Shuta's best friend. Clearly, there was no connection here. By the way, why is young Aizawa completely zipped in like that? Nap time, said Hisashi, solemnly. Sir, said Ida, raising his hand. Yes, young man, boomed All Might. There are 19 of. How are we handling the odd person out? Excellent question. In other exercises, we may handle it differently, but for today, one of you will be working alone. Occasionally, a hero may find themselves isolated when they originally expected help. However, for better balance, I have also arranged it so the odd hero out will be taking part in the last battle, so you'll have more time to strategize. But the other team would also have more time to strategize, Izuku noted. He really hoped it wouldn't be him. Not that he wanted to force it on any of his classmates. He just didn't want yet another handicap on the first day of training. All Might walked around with the box of ballots, pausing for each student to take one. He reached Izuku and held the box out to him with a wink. Izuku smiled back, reached in and grabbed one. A chill ran up his back and he froze, fingers wrapped tightly around the little ball. Something told him this was definitely the cursed, single-person ballot. Could he let it go? Would it be considered cheating if he picked a new one? But All Might was already walking away. Every part of his body tense. Izuku turned his hand over and forced his fingers apart. The 10th character of the Latin alphabet. For the 10th last team. He watched as everyone else started to pair up, and All Might looked at him apologetically. Izuku approximated a smile. Plus ultra, right? While the other ghosts watched poor Izuku sweat more and more, Yoichi gathered a pile of pillows and beanbags, and a small container of popcorn, then dropped unceremoniously onto the pile, ready to watch a bunch of teens beat the tar out of each other. And noticed this, glanced at him, and did a double take. Since when do you have popcorn? How do you have popcorn? Where did you get it? Have you been holding out on me? Can I have some? I'll fight you. It isn't real, said Yoichi. Neither are we. No, I mean you can't taste it. Or smell it. It's just a construct. For the aesthetic. Something none of them really bothered with, lately, but Yoichi wanted to put the effort in for Izuku. Even if Izuku probably would never be aware of it. But, popcorn. Sure. It's starting. The first round was Kuda and Sato versus Yaoyorozu and Kirishima. If he had to guess, he'd say Yaoyorozu and Kirishima would win. Yaoyorozu's quirk was perfect for setting up quick and simple barriers and traps, and Kirishima's was good for defense as well. That wasn't to say Kuda and Sato couldn't win as well. Sato had what seemed to be a fairly powerful strength enhancer, perfect for ripping through hastily constructed defenses, and Izuku didn't know if Kirishima would be able to completely counter him. Izuku also wasn't entirely sure what Kuda's quirk was. His first guess would have been a physical mutation, given his appearance, but thinking back, it didn't seem like he'd used anything like that during the quirk assessment, so those features were most likely vestigial, like Izuku's hair color, which suggested a less physical quirk. It had to be something that could be applied in combat against robots, though. Izuku was the only one who'd passed without villain points. So, it could go either way. He could continue to analyze, but his attention was drawn back to the team he'd be facing. Hagakure and Monoma. A blush rose up in his cheeks. It had to be Hagakure. He still hadn't apologized for running into her during the entrance exam. Hand-to-hand against her was going to be tough. He could only hope the support department had given her an invisible costume, and she wasn't. Well, uncostumed. But beyond that, not being able to see her would be a problem. She could get to the fake bomb without him even noticing. Monoma would be a challenge too. Given the number of pocket watches on his costume, Izuku suspected he had a time limit for how long he could copy a quirk. But he had no idea how long that could be, and it could be misdirection too. Izuku certainly wouldn't want to telegraph a weakness like that if he had that kind of quirk. Another option could be that he could only hold one quirk copy at a time. That'd be trickier for Izuku to deal with. Either way, he doubted Monoma could permanently hold an unlimited number of quirk copies. Monoma's personality was all wrong for that, and he didn't have Ida's engines anymore, unless he could choose to dump quirks? But why would he do that? Izuku's, formerly quirkless sensibilities rebelled against the very thought. He was overthinking this. He'd have to assume that Monoma could come at him with any quirk in the class. So, what would be the most inconvenient? All Mights, except Izuku had All Mights, and Monoma wasn't able to use it. Oh, and that could be a problem, couldn't it? Could Monoma be able to tell All Might didn't have a quirk anymore? Well, judging from what he was seeing right now, Izuku really didn't want him to take Yaoyorozu's quirk. It was sort of terrifying. Other scary ones would be Todoroki, he'd launched that ball with a glacier, and Tokoyami, a sentient quirk. So cool, but he thought Monoma would avoid Shuji and Azui, full-body mutations. Other than that, Monoma would probably wait and see who did the best, or which quirk would work best with Hagekyure's. He'd have to take Hagekyure's quirk into account, too. What if they both came at him invisibly and naked? Izuku would die. Each battle lasted for up to 15 minutes, not counting the 10 minutes the villain team had to set up. That's how long Izuku had to defend the fake bomb. As the defender, Izuku had another handicap. He only had to fail once to fail entirely. Stop that. This was a school exercise, and All Might wasn't going to expel him. Losing would SCK, but he'd be together with half the class on that front. The important thing was learning from the experience. And not getting too hurt. He returned his gaze to the screen as the match started. "We're a sentient quirk, too," said Banjo. "Aren't we cool?" "He doesn't know we're sentient, though," said Yoichi. "Also, he spent like 2 months straight gushing about how cool One for All was when we were with 8th. Didn't you get enough?" Banjo sulked. "It isn't the same." "Speaking of Monoma," said N, "why didn't you slap his little grabby hands away from One for All yesterday? Because a late bloomer is one thing, but someone confirmed not to have a quirk suddenly having bone-breaking super strength? Yagi might have beaten my brother, but that doesn't mean everyone who worked for him is gone. Never knew about Garaki at all. Way to bring down the mood and," said Banjo, elbowing the younger ghost. The mood was already brought down by the fake popcorn. Izuku wrote furiously in his notebook, trying to record every detail of the match. He pulled one of his gloves off with his teeth to get a better grip on his pencil. He'd need to practice writing with gloves on. He was missing important notes. Speaking of which, can we get copies of these recordings? You should be able to access them through your Ultra account on the school website. Izuku nodded and continued writing. As expected, Kirishima and Sada had gotten into a one-on-one fight down the hallway from the bomb room. Unexpectedly, however, they had seemed rather hesitant to hit each other. At least, until Sada dumped a packet of white powder, sugar according to All Might, into his mouth and started smacking at Kirishima indiscriminately. Kuda, meanwhile, had sent a small army of mice, animal control. Very cool, at Yaoyorozu, who had responded with mousetraps. The clock ran out, to the villain's victory. "It was surprisingly hard to hit someone," admitted Kirishima in the debrief. "We've been socialized to avoid violence," said All Might, nodding. "Overcoming that hesitation is part of our training, as is when not to use force." Next up were Kaminari and Shiro versus Aoyama and Jiraiya. Kaminari entered the building first, quickly engaging Aoyama, who had been directed towards Kaminari by Jiraiya. That fight got loud quickly. Shiro, meanwhile, scaled the outside of the building with his tape. Kaminari ultimately defeated himself with his own quirk. That was a pretty severe drawback. Maybe Kaminari should consider other fighting styles, which allowed Jiraiya to hear Shiro climbing up the wall. But Aoyama couldn't get back fast enough to prevent Jiraiya from being captured by Shiro. "I think Kaminari was the MVP," said Izuku. "He did hurt himself, which was bad, but his sacrifice allowed his teammate to safely reach the objective. If he hadn't, shorted out? It would have been better, of course, but..." Yaoyorozu shook her head. Shiro managed to capture one of the villains and safely reach the bomb. Additionally, he's the one who came up with the plan of attack. "Ah," said Izuku, that's true. Regardless, it is a plan that only bore fruit due to teamwork. Excellent work. Jairu, Aoyama, your division of labor was also a good plan, but don't forget the enemies you don't see. Time for our next match. This time, Azui and Tokoyami were defending against Todoroki and Uraraka. Good luck, Izuku said, waving slightly to Uraraka. Thanks. She gave him 2 thumbs up as she trailed slightly behind Todoroki. So, she said as they walked out through the door, how are we doing, Dash? The door closed. Izuku winced. Surely, they had strategized beforehand. Young Todoroki, said All Might, somewhat sternly. That was certainly an impressive display, but even when dealing with real villains, a hero has to be conscious of the damage they may do. A large number of villains are only minor criminals, or even otherwise ordinary citizens having a bad day. That's not what the media says, mumbled Todoroki, though he looked pale as Medibots carried Azui from the scene. The media is full of sensationalists. And even if it weren't, Azui isn't a real villain. There is a difference, he said, very gently, between going beyond and going too far. All Might paused. Todoroki hunched his shoulders. There was something familiar about his posture, something that made Izuku's stomach knot. All Might continued. It was a good strategy. Against another team, or against real villains, it would have been a more than appropriate strategy. In fact, it was even an appropriate strategy in this case, since you didn't know Azui had trouble with cold temperatures. But when you encountered her in the hall and noticed how poorly she was doing, you should have hit the emergency stop button. Instead of laying down more ice when Azui struggled to get free, which was what actually happened. Why didn't you stop the match? He didn't sound accusatory. Just flat and resigned. All Might made a face and gestured to the screens on the wall. About half of them showed static and the rest blurry shades of white and gray. Like the rest of the building, they had been iced over. Todoroki sighed. How much trouble am I in? You aren't, replied All Might. In trouble, that is. As your teacher, this is entirely my responsibility. I shouldn't have set you against Azui or should have gone over safety concerns more clearly. All Might paused, his face that of someone who knew they weren't getting their point across but didn't quite know what the problem was. Injuries are inevitable in heroics and hero training, but you don't want to maim your classmates. Or minor villains, really, if you can help it. So, consider this a learning moment. But it was just ice, said Kaminari. Cold kills people frequently, said All Might. People lose fingers and toes to frostbite regularly. Again, for anyone but Azui, this level of ice for such a short time PRD wouldn't have caused lasting damage, but it is something to be mindful of. That makes sense, young Todoroki? Yes, said Todoroki, head bowed. Alright. Young Uraraka, thank you for hitting the emergency stop button. It showed good thinking and good awareness. Young Tokoyami, your decision to hide the bomb in the basement was a good one, complimentary to your quirk. Izuku glanced over at Monoma. He had a sinking suspicion he knew what quirk he would copy. After moving to a new building, Ida and Ashido managed to pull a win as heroes from Ojiro and Shuji by melting a hole in the ceiling above the bomb and then jumping through to tag it after Ida confirmed its location with a scouting run. The general consensus of the class was that it was surprisingly clever and out of the box, but that it probably wouldn't have been feasible in real life. Ashido had then sheepishly admitted that she'd come up with the idea after hearing Izuku mumble about it. This, of course, made Izuku blush. Strawberry would probably be his nickname from now on. Better than Deku. It was his turn to go set up, now. He was unlikely to be able to beat Hagakure and Monoma at the same time, even if Monoma didn't copy any quirks at all. Assuming they didn't split up, a ridiculous course of action, he'd have to find a way to protect the bomb other than physically defending it. This was the problem that had been plaguing him all afternoon. He had to hide it. Then he either had to hide himself or use his location to steer them away from where the bomb really was. His capture would also lose him the match, so he had to be careful. He carried the bomb to the top floor. Uraraka's quirk could get them up there, but Izuku didn't think Monoma could handle the nausea. And if he did have a time limit, he wouldn't want to be airborne when it ran out. Zero had demonstrated his quirk could get him up the side of the building, but that had clearly also required a lot of skill in climbing, not just the quirk itself. Ida's quirk would get Monoma to the top of the building fast, but since he'd have to go room by room, either way, the top floor would slow them down the most, buy Izuku the most time. The room he picked was full of prop boxes. Izuku had to rearrange them to completely hide the bomb, and there was a chance Monoma and Hagakure would remember what it looked like before from the camera feeds, but he hoped they'd overlook it. He still had time. The second floor had office equipment in it. Clearly old junk the school didn't mind loosing. Izuku pulled as much of it out into the hallway as he could, his experience from the beach helping him maneuver quickly. He dumped a lot of it into the stairwell. The rest he left in the hallways. How much time did he have? Not long. He ran up the stairs, to the fourth floor, where Ashido had melted a hole in the floor. Here, he had multiple egress points. It would be harder for them to corner him. Also, he randomly closed half the doors on the floor. He could pretend to be guarding one of them. Delay them. How much longer? No time at all. Right on schedule, the air went dry and cold. Izuku, having planned for this, leapt for one of the door frames and held on. A thin layer of ice, not as thick as the one on the floor, crusted over his gloved fingers. Izuku counted to 5, then let his hands slip out of his gloves and dropped to the floor. Then he reached up and tugged his now empty gloves out of the ice. He inspected the ice momentarily and tested his ability to move on it. It wasn't as even or as thick as it had been when Todoroki used it, and the surface was a difficult and unpredictable mixture of smooth and rough. But it would become slicker as it melted. Izuku had predicted this. It made his closed doors and stacked boxes much more formidable obstacles. The ice wouldn't allow doors to open easily, and the boxes would also be reinforced and hard to move. Izuku was glad for the conversation All Might had with Todoroki. Although it probably hadn't been his intention, the way he had phrased his commentary on Todoroki's freezing strategy had made it seem like an automatic win, given that it wasn't used against someone who'd be seriously injured by it. Izuku hadn't been sure they'd do it, since it would handicap Hagakure so much. She couldn't walk around on ice barefoot. Unless she had a secondary mutation that made her skin tougher, or less sensitive to temperature, that would be so cool. No, focus. Monoma wouldn't have Ida's quirk either with this strategy. Even if he was unfamiliar with speed quirks, he would know that high speeds and ice didn't mix. Unless you were a speed skater, Izuku supposed. But Monoma didn't have ice skates, unless he took Yaoyorozu's quirk and made ice skates. But that would be horribly impractical with this uneven ice, and probably wouldn't work with Ida's quirk at all. So, he'd probably have Yaoyorozu's quirk anyway. And after that, for this exercise, Jiru's would be the most valuable. With Jiru's quirk, Monoma would be able to locate Izuku quickly. Another reason to separate himself from the bomb. They were coming. He hid himself out of immediate sight, in the room with the hole, on the off chance that Monoma couldn't hold that many quirks. There was a clatter from the stairwell. They were coming. Muffled voices. A louder thump. Maybe if you hadn't frozen everything dash. A sort of whoosh brought an oddly warm breeze and Izuku hissed. Todoroki's quirk must be more than ice. Given his overall appearance. Fire? Izuku was screwed. But hopefully his precautions would at least get him a good grade. There were more scrapes and clatters as Hagakure and Monoma forced their way through the stairwell. Then, relative silence. They were coming. I thought you said he was on this floor, said Hagakure, plaintively. He must have gotten free, said Monoma. Can't you listen for him again? There was a pause. Monoma must have responded non-verbally. We'll just have to be careful checking everything out, said Hagakure. The bomb must be on this floor after all. Okay, great. This was good news for Izuku. He eyed the hole in the floor. Part of him really didn't want to jump through. His brain was supplying him with all the things that could go wrong with such a jump. Especially with the layer of ice. He should have dragged one of the office desks up underneath it. Too late now. Minding his visibility, Izuku crept over to the side of the hole and lowered himself until he was hanging by his fingertips. It was still a long fall. Monoma and Hagakure's footsteps were growing closer. He let go. He tried to hit the ground properly, but his roll turned into a slide, and he hit a wall at a higher speed than he would have liked. Reflexively, he grabbed at his left arm. He knew this was going to happen. He's on the 3rd floor. What? He jumped through Ishido's hole. Izuku forced himself to his feet and sprinted towards the stairs. The 2nd floor had more hiding places than the 3rd. At the last minute, something twinged in the back of his mind, and he tried to stop. But the ice made this difficult. His legs went out from underneath him, and he went skidding down the hallway on his back, taking a mercifully clothed Hagakure out at the ankles. They slid together into the bottom of the stairs descending from the 4th floor, further battering Izuku's poor arm. He dodged Hagakure's capture tape and briefly considered pulling out his own, but there was Monoma, cautiously coming down the icy stairs. Icy stairs. It seemed neither Izuku nor Monoma had fully considered the obstacles that would result from coating a building like this in ice. Todoroki's ability to maneuver easily on this terrain was, in retrospect, a keystone of the freeze-everything strategy, not incidental. He needed to get away. He pushed Hagakure off of himself, and noted that she was just as muscular as he was, and slid on his knees. To the banister. He pulled himself up and slid down the rail, using the ice to his benefit. Using his uninjured arm, he gripped the end of the banister connected to the wall to slingshot himself down the 2nd floor hallway. And almost right into a desk he'd half forgotten he'd put there. He dodged it and recovered quickly before scrambling over the other obstacles in the hallway. He came to a scraping halt and tucked himself into the leg well of one of the desks. A convenient bar meant he could keep his feet off the ground and out of sight as well. Just like hiding from bullies. Only less dangerous and more fun. How much time was left? It had taken them about 5 minutes to get past the desks on the stairs, then maybe 2 or 3 to get to the 4th floor. They hadn't been moving quickly, probably because of the ice. Then, they'd been on the 4th floor for another couple of minutes before Izuku dropped to the 3rd, even if it had felt longer to Izuku. The tussle on the 3rd had taken a minute, tops, so he had 4 minutes left? He could win this. He could run out the clock. Maybe it wasn't the most heroic way to win, but he was supposed to be playing the villain, and he hoped Mr. Yagi would be proud of him anyway. Show yourself, called Monoma. Or I'll freeze you out. Could he do that? Maybe he had Jairu's quirk at first, but switched to Todoroki's later, and lost access to Jairu's? If only he knew more about how Monoma's quirk worked. It could be a bluff too. Even if it wasn't, why would he reveal himself? This late in the game, even if he was frozen in place, he could still win. And winning. It wasn't something he got to do very often. A buzz signaled the end of the match. Villains win. Or, rather, villain wins? Good job everyone. Come on out for the final debrief. MVP, 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 chanted Yoichi, Banjo, and En, arms slung around each other's shoulders. Our boy is MVP, cried Banjo. You know what this means, of course, said Hikage during a pause in the noise. The other ghosts looked at him. It means my quirk is the most valuable. The greatest power in the universe is the power of anxiety. Take that back, said Yoichi, throwing an imaginary kazoo at Hikage. It bounced harmlessly off his head. The most powerful thing in the universe is the power of friendship. Everyone knows that. What about those two? Asked Hikage, pointing at 2nd and 3rd. Unfortunately, the power of spite is also great, said Yoichi. Even so, they will soon find themselves defeated. Nana rubbed her temples. If I hadn't given up on sanity within 10 minutes of waking up in here, this would be what did me in. After an intense practical, the next stop was the nurse's office. There, the class found Azui already mostly recovered, and Izuku found out that he had, in fact, broken his arm. Are you sure it isn't just a sprain? It is broken? A fracture, and yes, quite sure. But a sprain can actually be worse than a break. Many true sprains never quite heal correctly. Either way, with my quirk you don't have to worry about it. She pressed her lips to Izuku's forehead. He felt his energy ebb to a new low. You should talk to Mr. Aizawa about falling techniques. Your body type is more like his than your other mentors. I will, promised Izuku. Good. You can go get changed now. Thanks, said Izuku, not quite wobbling out of the room. Midoriya. He almost jumped out of his skin. Uraraka. Sorry to startle you. No, it's fine. What is it? Oh, well, Ida and I were wondering if you'd like to come out with Yus to a cafe after school? It's nearby and apparently it has discounts for UA students. Indeed. My older brother talked about it frequently when he was a student here. WL, said Izuku. He looked at All Might, who was awkwardly supervising and directing other students in the hallway to the locker rooms. All Might caught his eye and nodded. Sure. That sounds like fun. This would be the last time Shoyuta would have to nap after school for a while. From tomorrow on, he'd be alternating quirk counseling with Midoriya with hero work. Why did he agree to do this again? Ken opened the door to the break room. With him came the acrid smell of smoke and hot dust. Which companies did the first-year costumes this year? He asked, voice dangerously soft enough to impress Aizawa. Why? Asked Hizashi. Because I want to. Talk to whoever thought it was a good idea to give a 15-year-old with no training in demolition not one, but two weapons that could level buildings at full charge. I just want to talk. Judging by the expression on Kan's face, Shoyuta seriously doubted that. Ken took a deep breath. What about your Hellions? Don't know. Yagi had them today. And you didn't watch? I was in court. What's wrong with Yagi anyway? Shoyuta, Hizashi, and Ken all turned to where Yagi was splayed in a chair. If the scene were a painting, it could easily be titled, Depression. I'm a failure as a teacher and a hero, he hummed. Huh, said Hizashi. Why? Young Azui nearly became hypothermic, and young Midoriya fractured his arm. There was a beat of silence as the others waited for him to go on. What? Ken asked. Is that it? The day started off well. Really did. Izuku got up on time, still filled with warm fuzziness from the time he spent with his friends, the afternoon before, had a good breakfast, left early enough to catch an earlier train, saw an interesting hero fight, and then he was hit with a wave of nausea as he caught sight of the crowd outside UA's gates. Was it a mob? An attack? Terrorists? Reporters? Yeah, those were cameras and microphones. But why was a crowd of reporters making him feel this way? Maybe they were terrorists disguised as reporters. Or maybe Izuku had picked up some paranoia to go with his anxiety. How fun. If they were real reporters, they were probably here about All Might. Him cutting back on active hero work to teach had been big news. But what should he do? Whoever they weren't likely to leave. He didn't want to walk through them, though. What if they were dangerous? And even if they weren't, he didn't want reporters looking at him, asking him questions. What would he say to them? He bit his lip and watched the crowd from around his chosen corner. Why did he have to be so wimpy and timid? He was a hero student, now. He should be better. Braver. There was Ida. He scuttled over to his friend. Midoriya. You're early today. Few people arrive at school at the same time I do. Why? I managed to catch the earlier train today, so. He looked back at the crowd of reporters. Maybe reporters. Maybe terrorists. I think, maybe we should wait to go in as a group, though. I mean, it'll be more efficient than trying to fight through those reporters one at a time, right? An excellent idea, Midoriya, exclaimed Ida, waving his hands enthusiastically. It's very admirable of you to always be thinking about how to help others. WL, said Izuku, blushing. It wasn't untrue, but it also wasn't the whole story. I mean, I don't. It's more that they kind of freak me out a bit. The reporters. Ida nodded sagely. There are heroes like that too. Are you planning on going underground, then? There was a certain amount of appeal to underground heroics, but he was supposed to be All Might's successor. Then again, if One for All never worked properly for him and Mr. Yagi asked for it back. Quirk or not, Izuku was here, now, in UA, in the hero course, and Mr. Yagi had said he could be a hero without a quirk. I haven't really decided yet. But UA teaches all hero course students the three main branches of heroics, so we don't really have to choose a specialty until later, and even then there are heroes like Sir Night Eye who blur the lines, right? Yes, it's one of the things that make UA such a superior institution, chortled Minoma. Minoma. I agree. It is important for all heroes to be aware of the work their colleagues do, and to be well-rounded individuals. Monoma? Said Izuku. When did you get here? Just a minute ago, said Monoma. I was looking for a way around these savages when I overheard your conversation. Really, it's a shame that UA allows such rabble to prevent students from entering. If only there was something they could do. I'm afraid I must disagree, said Ida. Freedom of the press is exceedingly important for the function of society. Monoma looked slightly alarmed. I don't mean to say it isn't, it's just dash, he gestured at the gates. We can't get in. The other entrances are like this too. It's aggravating. There might be another way in, said Ida, after a moment. Oh. Yes, my brother told me about a hidden entrance that was here when he attended UA. I suppose these would be the right circumstances to use it. Lead the way, then Ida, said Monoma. Ida nodded stiffly. We should wait and see if any of our classmates would like to come with us. Several of their classmates did want to come with them, including Uraraka, Azui, who was still a little under the weather, Tokoyami, Dark Shadow was not a fan of flashing lights, and Hagakure. They were also joined by a couple of 1B students, a cadre of business course kids, and a pink-haired support course girl who seemed very interested in Ida's legs, much to his flustered confusion. Kaken did not join them, much to Izuku's dismay, instead choosing to bulldoze his way through the ranks of reporters, nearly giving Izuku a heart attack when he body-checked a man with blue-white hair. At this point, their group was becoming rather large and noticeable, and Ida was getting antsy about the time, so off they went. Ida led them to what appeared to be an entirely unnoteworthy piece of wall and knocked. There was a pause just long enough to make Ida start to sweat, and then the wall opened, revealing Midnight Ms. Kiyama. Oh, she said, clearly delighted. Chibaida using the top-secret teacher's entrance? Has high school done what we couldn't? Are you finally loosening up? Chibaida. Firstly, how? But Ida was over 10 centimeters taller than Izuku. Secondly, Ida was never going to recover from this. That's not it. At all. I am simply attempting to help my fellow students enter the school without being harassed by reporters, Ms. Kiyama. You can still call me Big Sis Namuri, you know. I refuse. It would be inappropriate of me as a student. Ms. Kiyama sighed. Well, you aren't wrong about those reporters. They can be a pain. So, just this once, let me welcome you kids to the forbidden environs of the staff area. She made a grandiose gesture with her arm. And it's all thanks to Chibaida here. Ida started muttering about propriety and rules. Izuku had the feeling it would be a long day. All right, Hikage, in your professional opinion dash. What does building inspecting have to do with anything? What? Said Nana. I didn't say anything about building inspecting. You asked for my professional opinion. Yes, said Nana, already dreading where this would go. I was a vigilante. For the purposes of money, I was a professional, licensed building inspector. I thought you were a professional hermit, said N. I was an amateur hermit. You don't get paid for that. N blinked. I can't believe people let you into their buildings. There were a few times dash. Nana decided to table the question of how neither she nor N had known Hikage was a building inspector. They find. Forget the professional part. In your opinion, what was going on with that one reporter guy? Oh, said Hikage. He's definitely planning a murder. A murder, exclaimed Yoichi. Yes, and probably of someone close to ninth. Why didn't you say something? Demanded Yoichi, attempting to lift the taller man up by the front of his shirt and failing. Because there's not much we can do about it? Just because you're right doesn't mean I have to like it. He spun on his heel and stalked up to the silent and incomplete ghost of Tashinori. It had better not be you, do you hear me? Don't you dare pull an Obi-Wan on poor, sweet Izuku. Does anyone know what he's talking about? Asked Nana. Not really, admitted Banjo. Today, said Mr. Aizawa, after he finished passing out feedback from the battle trial, you'll pick a class president. All around Izuku, his classmates threw their hands into the air, eager for the chance to show off their leadership skills. Izuku kept his hand down. It wasn't that he didn't want to stand out or do the work. It was just, between training after school with Mr. Yagi and Aizawa and trying to get his anxiety under control, he didn't think he'd do a very good job. Yoichi started disappearing his Izuku for president banners. Ida would do well, Izuku thought. Look at him, organizing everyone into a vote. You're not running, Midori? Asked Hagakure. And no, haha, I have too many other commitments to do a good job, I think. That's too bad. I would have voted for you. There was a smattering of agreement, mostly from Ida and Uraraka. Izuku started blushing. Really? Why? Strawberry, someone whispered. Well, you helped me out during the entrance exam, and you were pretty cool during training yesterday. More agreement. But if you're not running, I guess I'll pick Monoma. He did get rid of the purple creep. Yes, I am clearly the superior candidate, crowed Monoma, standing up and putting his foot on his chair to pose. But his personality's really weird, which is why you would have been my first choice, Midoriya. I think Ida would be a good choice, said Uraraka, raising her hand. He's super organized and he helped a bunch of us get past the reporters this morning. More general agreement. Then Todoroki cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him. Yaoyorozu, he said. That was it. Good point, agreed Jair. A tie. As the only one who hadn't voted for one of the three in the tie, Aoyama was forced to be the tiebreaker. This was done as dramatically as humanly possible. Yaoyorozu was now president of Class 1A. This led to a ferocious battle between Monoma and Ida that Ida won by a single vote. Monoma was promptly chosen as class treasurer, just in time for their other classes. Those who possess forbidden knowledge should stay together, said Tokoyami gravely as he sat down with Uraraka, Ida, and Izuku. Are you talking about the staff area? Asked Azui, who slid in after him. Indeed, intoned Tokoyami gravely. The dark path we have all walked. Fumi is just bad at asking people to be his friends. Dark shadow. Izuku almost started crying into his rice. Having friends was so great. I'll be your friend, said Izuku. Me too, said Uraraka, pumping a fist. Said Tokoyami, coughing into a fist. I am sure we will be great companions in the darkness of the coming days. Speaking of darkness, Izuku couldn't help but feel uneasy about something. He had been ever since seeing those reporters. So, Midori, is your hair full of secrets? What? Don't listen to her. She's just being silly. Like a little sister. It's what you always say about that actor you like. His hair is fluffy because it's full of secrets. So, you and Dark Shadow are like brother and sister? Asked Midoriya, changing the subject. The conversation segued into discussion of their families, and just when Ida was extolling the virtues of his older brother, Izuku's unease spiked. He dropped his chopsticks. Is something wrong? Asked Uraraka. I don't know. It just feels like something bad is going to dash. The school alarm promptly went off. Wow, said Kirishima. Ida can do entrances and exits. Manly. Wow, said Banjo. I guess they picked the right guy for the job after all. He can find entrances and exits. More than my class vice president ever did. Are you copying the small red child? Asked Taikich. What? Never mind. Today's heroics class will be focused on how to fall safely and other basic combat techniques. Before we begin, although you may practice these techniques on your own, outside of class, if you want to spar with others, you need adult supervision until you reach a level where I'm satisfied you won't seriously injure yourself or others by mistake. Now, firstly, Mr. Aizawa? Was it really just the press breaking in earlier? It was time for his first special quirk training with Aizawa, and he should be asking what they were doing today, especially since Aizawa had him change out of his gym uniform and back to his regular uniform, but he couldn't stop thinking about the break-in. What makes you think otherwise? I'm not sure. This morning when I saw them, I got a really bad feeling. Like something bad was going to happen. And it doesn't seem, logical that normal reporters would be able to do that to UA's gate. I mean, anyone can have any quirk, no such thing as a villainous quirk. But someone with a quirk like that, they'd put a lot of effort into controlling it and stuff like this wouldn't happen by mistake. I guess a reporter could have done it on purpose, though, but then it'd be really easy for UA to find out it was them, wouldn't it? Or the police. Since heroes and police have access to the National Quirk Registry, so you just have to cross-reference reporters with the registry to find quirks that could fit. But would they know that? Anyway, it seems more logical for a third party to have used the press as cover to infiltrate the school. For what? If nothing is missing and no one is hurt, which would be grounds for school being cancelled, the next conclusion would be information gathering. But that still leaves the question of the ultimate ends. Mr. Aizawa? Are you okay? His teacher had been glaring at a camera mounted in the corner of the classroom and mouthing things at it. I'm fine, said Aizawa. He sighed. You are right that we haven't located the person who destroyed the gates, but please be assured that we are investigating the incident thoroughly. Especially Principal Nizu. He shot another glare at the camera, as if to say he'd better be. Regardless, it isn't something you need to worry about as a student. We're adding more safety protocols to make sure it doesn't happen again. Okay. So, what are we doing today? Sensory deprivation? Electric shocks? Stress positions? Beanbag barrage for dodging? High-stakes hell exam. He was ready for anything and very excited. Aizawa stared at him flatly. Doing quirk counseling. Yes. Except for maybe the last one. What exactly gave you the idea that any of those things had anything to do with quirk counseling? Izuku started to get the feeling he'd seriously messed up. Except he didn't feel particularly anxious about it. Oh, Mom used to get brochures like that in the mail after I was diagnosed? She didn't ever answer any, but apparently, some people originally thought to be quirkless got quirks after being in a high-stress situation. But no one actually did any of those things to you. Not really. Midoriya. Izuku looked away. He shouldn't have said anything. He didn't like the quirk counselor at Isley Elementary, but he didn't want to get her in trouble, either. After all, he was the only one she had to do that stuff with, since his quirk hadn't shown up. Aizawa sighed with the air of someone exercising a lot of self-control. Except for that last one, said Aizawa, and that's debatable, all of those are torture techniques. That maybe explained a few things. They are not a normal part of quirk counseling. At some point, we may incorporate some combat into this, but that will be to help you become more familiar with your quirk. Not just for the sake of making you stressed. But if we aren't doing combat, what are we doing? Well, first we're going to try to figure out what your quirk is. Why don't you sit down? He took out some papers as Izuku made his way to his desk. Alright, I'm going to go through these questions and write down your answers. Then we're going to go through them again while I'm canceling your quirk. He paused. Actually, first, what did you mean when you said you had a bad feeling about the reporters? If I were alive, said Yoichi, I would be committing so much murder right now. I thought we left this behind when 9th graduated, said Nana. I thought you said you were going to forgive them because they were stupid kids and 9th forgave them. Well, first off, I lied. Secondly, teachers aren't kids. If we ever get hit by a quirk that brings us back to life, the quirk counselor at his old school will be my first victim. Nana sighed. That isn't going to happen. Who's going to stop me? Less a who, and more the fact that there has never been a quirk that could revive the dead. Meaningless, exclaimed Yoichi. Death cannot stop me. Think he's finally lost it after all this time? Aston, leaning towards Nana. No, I think he's just messing with us, hoped Nana. All right, kid, said Aizawa, exhaustion evident in his tone. Between your answers, your exam results, the battle trial results, how you react when I use my quirk on you, and Monoma's assessment. Your quirk is at least partially sensory. Izuku tried not to feel disappointed, but that seemed rather incomplete as a conclusion. Even though he knew about danger sense, and this probably was danger sense. Yeah, I know, it's underwhelming, but remember this is the first session. Whatever your quirk actually does, though, you seem to be using it to detect threats. Okay, that was more in line with expectations. Maybe? I think so. That feels right. We also need to figure out what it's stockpiling. Have you ever felt any particular draw to certain situations? More than your peers? I watch a lot of hero fights. You're a fight chaser? A little bit, admitted Izuku, squirming a little. Aizawa sighed heavily. I seriously hope your quirk doesn't stockpile danger. Don't test that. He wasn't going to. Probably. Speaking of, though, what did One for All actually stockpile? Power was a very vague description. He'd just gone along with it because quirk and B, all might, but it would probably be good to know. Next time we meet, I'll be running you through the basic quirk assessment battery. That's a series of tests usually given to 5-year-olds to help their pediatric quirk doctors and quirk counselors identify difficult or stubborn quirks. You should have gone through it when you were younger. Izuku shook his head. All I remember is the X-ray. Why would you get an X-ray? For the toe joint? To tell whether or not I was quirkless. Why was he insisting on this? He was going to blow his cover and his secret out of the water. This was so dumb. But he did say it. Maybe it was his guilty conscience from lying to and misleading Mr. Aizawa so much. That's a myth, said Aizawa. What? It isn't true. Aizawa began to slump down in his seat. It's an old wives' tale. Everyone quirkless has the double joint, but not everyone with the double joint is quirkless. I have the double joint, as do about 25% of people with meta quirks. By the time he finished, only the top half of his face was visible. Oh, said Izuku. He wasn't sure what else to say. At least the secret of One for All was completely intact. You did say something like that before. He'd been too upset and nervous about the test to really process it. I hate to say this, kid, but it sounds like everyone involved in your early quirk education was incredibly incompetent. You shouldn't have had to deal with that, even if you were truly quirkless. It takes just as much counseling to deal with that in today's day and age as something like, say, a Shido's quirk. Izuku had never heard it put like that before. Okay. Now, before I send you off for today, do you have any questions about anything we'll be doing? Any of the tests we'll be running, normal quirk counseling procedures, anything. It's important for you to feel comfortable about this. Izuku's eyes teared up. This had already been a very emotional day, and he wasn't sure a teacher had ever asked him that and meant it. Mr. Aizawa, he said earnestly, you're the best teacher I've ever had. Is that a joke? Asked Aizawa, flatly. Izuku shook his head, centrifugal force flinging his teardrops away. That's messed up, kid. I'm terrible. You're the best, protested Izuku. I just need you to know how incredibly low that bar is. Your other teachers must have gotten shovels to dig tunnels under it. They must be dancing limbo in hell. Izuku blinked. He had no idea what that meant. I think they're all still alive. Not for long, muttered Aizawa. Shoyuta trudged back to the staff break room. His counseling session with Midoriya had lasted a little over an hour, so while there were still teachers in the building, many of them had left. With the exception of semi-retired heroes like Recovery Girl, everyone working here had 2 full-time jobs. Hizashi, despite his carefree air, had a third in the form of his radio show. Hizashi had probably left with the students. But Hizashi wasn't either of the ones he wanted to talk to. Not today. He opened the door. 3, for teachers were there, but Snipe didn't count, seeing as he was completely passed out on one of the couches with his gas mask half off. He must have had an early shift patrol today, poor sucker. Nemuri was there too, with most of her hero outfit on. She was applying her hero-grade makeup, waterproof, resistant to 3 common contact poisons, and guaranteed not to react badly with mace. More importantly, Kan and Yagi were both there, poring over papers on the same desk, no less. Shoyuta walked up to the table and looked down at sheets and sheets full of incomprehensible numbers. What are you doing? He asked. We dash. Don't tell him, said Kan urgently. This is going to be my class's leg up on Aizawa this time around. Ha! Good one. Yagi slapped Ken's back, and apparently even in his skeletal form he could pack a punch, because Ken had the air knocked out of him. Before he could recover, Yagi continued, I'm making personalized nutrition plans for his class. What? One of my undergraduate degrees was in nutritional and health sciences, after all. Wow, there was a lot to unpack there, but Shoyuta was more than happy to leave it in its box. He had other fish to fry and topics to interrogate. Small talk requirement fulfilled, he moved on. How well do you know Midoriya? Yagi blinked and put down his pencil. Moderately so? We met about this time last year and have been meeting regularly since then. So much to unpack. Why? They impressed me, I suppose? He was involved in the body snatcher incident last year. That was an understatement. He had a lot of heroic spirit, continued Yagi. But not so much in the, body category. I thought it would be a shame, a waste, really, if he wasn't able to pursue his dream and a hero school prep course wasn't really in the cards for him, considering his quirk status and the timing. And I did have this degree. He waved his hands vaguely at the table. I just gave him a little help. What brought all this on, anyway? Asked Nemuri. Midoriya is the little green-haired kid, right? One of Chibida's new friends. If you keep calling him that, I won't be held responsible for when he snaps and attempts murder. But yes, that's Midoriya. So? He told me I was the best teacher he'd ever had. Nemuri started laughing. Oh, said Yagi. I'm glad the two of you are getting along so well. I think he's pulling your leg, Shoyuta, said Nemuri, coming over to pat him on his shoulder. Man, I didn't think a friend of Chibida's would have it in him. Such youth. I cannot even begin to tell you how much he wasn't. Nemuri's laughter died off. Judging from some comments he made today, said Shoyuta, not to mention the discrepancies between his record and his observed behavior in the classroom, I'd say he's been the target of severe quirkism in the past, particularly from his teachers. Did he ever mention anything like that to you? Yagi's face darkened and the mood in the room grew much more somber. Not in so many words, no. However, some of his comments about his teachers disturbed me enough to bring it to the attention of the Muzutafu Educational Services District, but as an unrelated stranger without concrete proof. You can use the acronym, you know, muttered Vlad. You're telling me they ignored the number one hero. Yagi made a face. I didn't go to them as All Might. Can you imagine the media frenzy if I did that? I didn't want to paint that kind of target on young Midoriya's back. That was fair, actually. If largely anonymous Shoyuta had enemies, All Might had 10 times as many. Not to mention supposed fans. Other avenues of inquiry were also fruitless, said All Might, countenance darkening. I asked some of my police colleagues, but they don't have full discretion over the direction of their investigations, and again, if I were to use my weight to move them, it would get out and people would wonder why I was so concerned with an apparently normal middle school. Did you try talking to Nizu about it? No? Why? Shoyuta reminded himself that although Yagi was an alumnus, he was also very new as a teacher and was as of yet unfamiliar with Nizu's more interesting traits. I'm going to, said Shoyuta, and you're going to come with me. He turned to Kansas. Have you heard anything from Bakugo about quirk discrimination? All I've heard from him are explosions, threats, and some kind of complex I don't have nearly enough psychiatric training to. They're from the same school, he realized. Yeah. Ken pinched his brow. So, the sweet shy kid you keep gushing about dash. Both Shoyuta and Yagi attempted to reassure Ken they weren't gushing, and the demon brat are from the same school. That is what their records say, agreed Shoyuta. Did you know Yagi? Oh, that they knew each other? Actually, I was rather under the impression they were childhood friends, as Midoriya ran out to help him during the body snatcher incident. Shoyuta grunted. It was possible. He hadn't seen the two of them interact, at any rate. I'm going to Nizu with you, said Kan, standing up. No matter what else this hell school did, they deserve to suffer for inflicting Bakugo Katsuki on me with those recommendations full of lies. Why don't you just expel him if he's that bad? Because he's talented, hardworking, and hasn't actually broken any rules except for the swearing. He's just a pain I wasn't prepared to deal with and will probably contribute more to my hearing loss than Yamada by the end of the year. Wait, said Yagi. What exactly are you expecting Nizu to do in this situation? Well, said Nemuri, who still hadn't left yet, let's just say there's a reason his name is God in the staff group chat. Terrible did not even begin to describe how Izuku felt when he woke up. His skin was static. His mouth was dry in a way that hurt. It felt like a siren was going off in his brain, and also like it was too quiet. He wanted to both run all the way to the school and hide in his closet. This, of course, left him paralyzed in bed. He hadn't felt remotely like this since the first time someone had left spider lilies on his desk at school. What was wrong with him? No, that was the wrong question. All signs pointed to him having danger sense. He was in danger, and also immobile in bed. With a great deal of effort, he turned to his bedside table and grabbed his phone. The clock in the corner read 4, far too early to call anyone. And yet, with shaky fingers, he navigated to Mr. Yagi's contact information and pressed dial. To Izuku's surprise, it only rang once. Young Midoriya? Is something wrong? The sound of his voice loosened the terrible knot under Izuku's breastbone. Maybe? I don't know, I think so. There were sounds of movement on the other side of the line. What happened? I just woke up and I think it's danger sense. Something bad is going to happen. I'm on my way. Is your mother with you? No. She's at a tech conference in Tokyo. She won't be back until tomorrow. Mr. Yagi, I don't think it's something here. I think it's later. At the school. There was a pause. My boy, are you quite sure? Izuku's laugh was just a little hysterical. I mean, I'm pretty new to this, but he'd like to think his flight or fight reflex would have a more constructive response to an immediate threat. I'm sorry. Sorry, I shouldn't have woken you up. I should have waited. Nonsense. Forewarned is forearmed, and time is one of the most valuable resources a hero can have. I'm still picking you up. I'll just Mr. Yagi coughed. Take the car instead. The car? You mean Hercules? The excitement was enough to free Izuku from his paralysis and propel him into a sitting position. Well, yes, but my boy, how did you know? I don't think I've ever mentioned the name in my interviews. But you did. In one of your American interviews. It was for a local station and you and Mr. Shield were on together. But those were in English. I know. When I found out about them, it really motivated me to work on my English. I think I could probably pass the level 2 fluency test. Young Midoriya, have I ever told you how glad I am that you aren't a villain? Hikage, did danger sense ever make you feel this bad? Asked Nana as Yoichi fussed in the background. Super anxiety made me feel this bad all the time. Sometimes it made me feel worse. I got used to it. Nana let out a sigh of relief. It's CGD for 9th right now, but if it was normal for the quirk. That's good then, said N. Not for 9th, obviously, but if that's just how the quirk works, he'll be able to figure it out. What did it usually mean when you felt like this? Generally, that someone was planning on killing me in the next few hours. Dead, than usual, silence. Said N. You know, said Nana, sometimes the kinds of lives we led slips my mind, but then the universe is always real happy to turn around and slap it back into me. Yoichi started screeching. Do you feel any worse now that we're here? Asked Mr. Yagi after shutting Hercules down. Not really, said Izuku. He slumped down in his seat and looked away. I'm sorry, I dragged you out of bed and this is probably just a stupid, pointless, meaningless panic attack. He felt tears begin to prick at the edges of his eyes. He was so stupid. And selfish. All Might could be out helping people right now. Or taking care of himself, which, according to Recovery Girl's comments during their training sessions, he didn't do nearly enough of. Hey, there's no need to cry, it's all right. Because you're here? Asked Izuku with a sniffle. Well, yes, but also, even if it was just a panic attack, I'd still want to be here for you. He reached across the central console to pat Izuku on the shoulder. Then his face twisted into something rather sheepish. But on the subject of panic attacks, something did occur to me on the way here. Izuku looked back down at his knees. What is it? This is the anniversary of the day we met. Izuku had known that actually, waking up as he had driven it from his mind, but the date was marked on his calendar. He'd even gotten All Might a gift, although he hadn't yet talked himself into being brave enough to give it to him, and with what happened today, It would most likely languish in his desk drawer for an indefinite period of time as the idea of giving it became progressively more awkward. My boy? I can't quite make out what you're saying. You're mumbling. Izuku clapped his hands over his mouth. Sorry. It's quite all right. I'm just an old man with hearing problems. You're not old. I just don't see how that's connected to this. He gestured at himself in all his vaguely trembling glory. Young Midoriya. You almost died 3 separate times that day. That's traumatic. And sometimes anniversaries are reminders. I only almost died once. The first time with the sludge villain, grabbing onto my leg, and I don't think I ever apologized for telling you to let go. I was just so surprised, and then the sludge villain again. But I only almost died the first time. He trailed off as Mr. Yagi gave him a look. He'd thought his mother was the only one who could give looks like that. Do you really think this is connected to that? I don't know, said Mr. Yagi. Do you feel like it might be? I don't know, said Izuku. He bent over and knotted his fingers in his hair. Do you think it might help to stay home today? No, yelped Izuku. No, he repeated, trying to calm his racing heart. All right. Never fear, my boy. Mr. Yagi gave him another steadying shoulder pat. In that case, let's go into this with the assumption that this is Danger Sense, and it is attempting to warn you of a real threat. Okay, said Izuku. He rubbed at his eyes. What do we do first? Mr. Yagi tensed and looked up at the top floors of UA. Well. Said Nizu. That is something of a conundrum. The extent of your quirk is unclear, and it is not properly registered, so we cannot go through the official routes we normally would for a warning given through a precognitive or clairvoyant quirk, even given that we are aware of One for All and the probable nature of Danger Sense. Nizu knowing about One for All had been a bit of a surprise. In retrospect, maybe it shouldn't have been. All Might would have had to tell Nizu something so that Izuku was allowed on campus before he was really a student, and seeing as how All Might was originally teaching here to find a successor. Well, it made sense. Izuku just wished he'd been told. How many other people knew was a question for later, however. Your inexperience with the quirk and other circumstances further complicates the matter. Sorry, said Izuku. Whatever for. It isn't your fault. Nizu did not wait for an answer. Then there is yesterday's incident to consider. You say you felt something with the reporters. Why, sir? Tashinori, I do believe you have a contact who could clear this up much more efficiently. I know, said Mr. Yagi. He isn't picking up his phone. You don't think Dash? Started Izuku. No, he just hasn't been speaking to me lately. Oh, I was under the impression you had been communicating with him regularly since returning to Muzutafu. He thought I would change my mind about something I didn't change my mind about, apparently. It doesn't matter. What else can we do? A good number of things, luckily. Midoriya, I am going to make a series of phone calls. I would like you to tell me if the sensation you are experiencing changes at all while I make them. Yes, sir. Nizu began methodically going through Izuku's list of teachers, warning them that something like yesterday might happen and going over lesson plans and safety procedures. Nothing really changed. Until Nizu called 13. Oh gosh, they were going to go to the unforeseen simulation joint on a field trip today? That was so cool. But after Nizu talked to 13 about checking safety systems, a little bit of the tension he'd been holding onto leaked away. Interesting, said Nizu. Perhaps we should reschedule rescue training until Dash. Izuku dove for Nizu's garbage bin. Or perhaps not, mused Nizu as Izuku expelled the meager contents of his stomach. It was a good thing he hadn't eaten breakfast. Hikage, said Banjo. I'm sorry for calling you a dead-eyed, emotionally stunted bee with a warped sense of humor if this is what you had to put up with all the time. You called me a dead-eyed, emotionally stunted bee? Not to your face, but yes. Oh. It isn't as if those things aren't all true. I'm okay, said Izuku. That just felt bad. No cancellations in that case, said Nizu as Mr. Yagi hovered. Why? Oh gosh, now I know how Uraraka feels. Perhaps you should stay home, Dash. No. I can't. That would be. Nizu held up his hands. Pause? It was merely a suggestion. Can I offer you some tea? Yes, please, said Izuku, voice catching uncomfortably on his raw throat. I do have a few more calls to make. Do you feel up to staying, or would you prefer to head down to Recovery Girl? Or perhaps even the cafeteria? I imagine you haven't eaten breakfast. I'd like to stay. Very well. Nizu picked up his phone again. Izuku could just make out the click on the other end when it was picked up. Am I a mouse? A dog? A bear? One thing's for sure. I'm the principal. There was laughter on the other end of the line. No, not at all. I am in fact calling for you, Tensei. Or should I say Ingenium? I'm aware this is last minute, and you were planning on taking the day off. How do I know? It was quite simple, really, but between the break-in yesterday and a tip I received this morning regarding a threat to the school, I would like a few more hands on deck than usual. Why, yes, you can stay with your brother's class. Do try not to tease Shoyuta too much. He has a reputation to maintain. After a few more pleasantries, Nizu hung up. Midoriya? I think that's better? I'm sorry, it's hard to tell what could be the quirk and what's just me feeling bad. Nizu nodded. In that case, I do recommend that you head to Recovery Girl's office. My other calls will be similar, and the other heroes will not be with your class. Why not? Asked Mr. Yagi. Because Midoriya's reaction to the field trip being cancelled suggests that the danger may not be limited to himself or his class. And one more thing. Midoriya, I noticed that you put in some costume alteration requests. Naturally, most of them will not be finished until sometime next week. However, some of the support items you mentioned are fairly common. If you have time before the field trip, you should pay a visit to Power Loader. Izuku hadn't expected it, but he did feel much better after eating, despite his continuing sense of impending doom. It was also about half an hour from the beginning of homeroom, so he had the time to go to the support department and check if they had anything he could take. He hoped they had grappling hooks. Izuku had always wanted a grappling hook. Mr. Yagi took him most of the way there, but students had started to arrive at this point, and Izuku convinced him to go prepare for classes and hide in the staff area so that no one would wonder why he, a skeleton man not recognizable as a hero, was at the school. Before too long, Izuku stood in front of a rather sturdy-looking metal door. He hoped this was the right one. He raised his hand to knock just as something crashed into him. This was it for sure. The way he would die. The danger he had foreseen. Never mind. He was fine, just on the ground. Oh, there was a person there. You okay? Said Izuku, sitting up and rubbing his head. I'm fine, just a little startled. What are you doing here anyway? I'm here for support. Gear. He sort of trailed off as he looked up. It was the intense pink-haired girl from the other day. As he watched, her expression changed from one of mild concern to calculating interest. Support gear, you say? Shoyuta answered his phone as he walked down the hall. Nizu, I've already done every security check I can think of that'll fit dash. Not quite why I was calling, although I can see why you would think so. One of your students needs to be rescued from the support department. Shoyuta changed direction without missing a beat. It's Midoriya, isn't it? Why yes. Did you send him down there without warning him? Yes, again. You know me so well. Shoyuta hung up. Hey, Midoriya? Asked Uraraka, after Aizawa passed out a costume revision assignment and feigned passing out. Yes, said Izuku, knowing that his eyes were preternaturally wide and fine tremors were running through his body. He was a wreck. Are you okay? Why did you come to class with Mr. Aizawa? And what's that you're holding on to? Asked Kaminari. Said Izuku. I was sort of abducted by the support department, but in a nice way, and they gave me this grappling hook. Wow, cool. I didn't know we could get stuff like that from the support department. You should really read the student handbook, Kaminari, said Ida, pushing up his glasses. But it's so long. Ida sked and adjusted his glasses more vigorously. You're a student. You should at least be familiar with what is expected of you. Speaking of which, Midoriya, do you know how to use that? As much as he could learn from a 10-minute crash course. Yes, said Izuku, but it was clear from Ida's face that he had hesitated too long. Midoriya. You shouldn't have something like that in the classroom without knowing how to use it. Ida half stood up, and Izuku clutched the grappling hook closer to his chest. No. Mine. Maybe he was too attached to something he'd only had for a little over an hour, but the support department hadn't been able to give him any smoke bombs or flash grenades due to new school regulations regarding explosives, and he'd gone through a lot this morning. Distress washed over Ida's face, and Izuku wondered if he'd accidentally smacked into some old trauma. I wasn't going to take it, he said, earnestly waving his hands. I just wanted to make sure you knew where the safety dash. The door to the classroom slammed open. Is that my little brother I hear? Asked a beaming man in a tracksuit. Without waiting for an answer, he bounded over to where Ida was sitting and clapped him on the back. Come to embarrass you horribly. From the expression on Ida's face, this venture was doomed to failure. I thought you were joking when you said you'd see me today, exclaimed Ida, beaming. Why would I joke about that? You joke about a lot of things. Like knowing Vigila Dash. Okay. Yes, funny jokester, that's me. Now why don't you introduce me to your classmates? Of course. I have been remiss in my duties as vice president. He stood and executed a 90-degree bow. Forgive me. This is my brother Ida Tensei, also known as the pro-hero Ingenium. Izuku could almost see his classmates start to put together the puzzle pieces of Chibata and extremely tall older brother. He was more concerned about whether or not it would be rude to ask Ingenium for his autograph. And to check his analysis page on Ingenium. That's me. And I'll be your special guest today. Now, where's Aizawa? You're supposed to have him for homeroom, right? As one, the class pointed to the giant yellow caterpillar in the corner of the room. Oh my gosh, Shoyuta, I thought you were joking dash. Ingenium was, to put it in a single word, cool. To put it in 2 words, he was unbelievably cool. So cool Izuku was almost able to forget the impending field trip-related doom they were all facing. But not quite. So Izuku slogged through his classes, still thrilled to be there and wanting to do his best, but unable to truly focus past the crushing weight of what might happen. His classmates and maybe friends hovered at the periphery of his suffering, clearly wanting to help, but just as clearly unsure how, or what lines they could or couldn't cross, leading them to resort to painfully awkward normal small talk. Until they sat down for lunch, that is, by which time Minoma and Ida had gotten into a conversational spiral about how amazing UA was, how awesome Ingenium was, and how UA was truly superior for being able to have pro-heroes like Ingenium come in as TAs on such short notice. Midoriya, said Uraraka, startling him out of his 4th or 5th Kaken sweep. It was still possible that his bad feeling was related to Kaken hunting him down and blowing him up. He'd be mortified about making such a big deal over it if that was the case, but it would be preferable to, say, a terrorist attack. Why did he keep coming back to terrorist attacks? Are you okay? You've just seemed really down today and dash. Invisible hug, shouted Hagakure before grabbing Izuku and lifting him over her head. There was a beat of whispering near silence. Then Uraraka stood up, slamming both hands on the table and inadvertently making it float. You have got to tell me your workout routine. Izuku agreed. Strawberry, someone whispered. I generally say what's on my mind, said Azui as the Idas had radically different reactions to the bus seating arrangement. Aha, said Izuku. The swaying of the bus plus the strain of probably danger sense was making him nauseous. What is it, Azui? Call me Tsuyu. The first time a person his age let him call them by name since kindergarten, and he couldn't properly appreciate it. Figured. I was watching the videos of the battle trials I missed last night, Tsuyu continued, and I realized I don't think any of us know what your quirk is. Izuku's first impulse was to lie or redirect the conversation. Years of quirklessness had left their mark. But on second consideration, was there really a reason to lie? He wasn't going to talk about One for All, obviously, but the rest of it was harmless and bound to come out eventually anyway. Well, said Izuku, adjusting the fit of his air filter self-consciously. That's a good question, actually. If you're keeping it a secret, I won't press. No, that isn't it. Yes, it was. It's just that, it's really subtle? As in, so subtle I thought I was quirkless until recently. Huh. Oh wow, said Kirishima, that must have been hard. I mean, I got teased for having a boring quirk. I can't even imagine dash. Your quirk isn't boring. It's more than enough to be a pro. But what is your quirk? Asked Monoma. Said Izuku, well, we're not entirely sure, but we think it lets me sense things that are dangerous. But I've also got anxiety, so. Monoma was frowning, but before he could speak, one of Hagakure's gloves waved frantically in front of his face. Is that how you knew I was there? She asked. In the battle trial and the entrance exam? Maybe? I think so. You were kind of anxious this morning, said Uraraka, concerned. Did something bad happen to you? Not yet, said Izuku weakly. We still don't really know how it works, so it could just be the anxiety. He trailed off. Everyone was kind of staring at him. He pressed back against his seat, wishing there was somewhere to hide. Well, said Uraraka, suddenly pumped up, we'll just have to keep an eye out. We're hero students, aren't we? There was a general cheer of consensus and Izuku managed a shaky smile. So, this was what it was like to have friends. Eventually, Mr. Aizawa told them to calm down, but there was no heat in the scolding. Maybe, Izuku thought, past the ever-increasing buzzing in his head, today would be okay after all. Yeah, said Hikage, there's really no chance of that. The unforeseen simulation joint was an incredible space. Space Hero 13 was about 1,000 times cooler in person than on TV. All Might, in his Golden Age rescue specialized costume, looked like he'd just stepped off the pages of a comic book. But just like Tsuyu's name, Izuku didn't have the ability to appreciate it. As the other students marveled over the USJ, Izuku watched the adults quietly talk to one another. It seemed to be something serious. Did you find anything else with the safety checks? Asked Shoyuda. A few of the areas had the difficulty set too high. Apparently some of the third years decided to get some practice in and their supervisor didn't reset everything. Other than that, nothing. 13 shook their head. No signs of structural failure, no security gaps. Everything seems, well, normal. Well, said All Might, whatever happens, we're prepared. Aizawa seriously doubted they were prepared for anything, but the most obvious, most likely things? What do you think, Ingenium? He asked. Everything looks fine to me, said Tensei, shrugging. But if it was something obvious, then it wouldn't be so much of a threat, right? We're still not sure how Midoriya's quirk really works, said Shoyuda. It could be a threat just to him. Sighed heavily. Tensei smiled in a way that just about guaranteed Shoyuda would be teased about this later. Well, I'm going to start my speech now, said 13, giving the others a thumbs up. Wish me luck. As soon as 13 finished their, surprisingly moving, speech, all of Izuku's attention zeroed in on the air next to the fountain. A swirl of dark mist appeared next to it. Izuku felt like he couldn't breathe. Mr. Aizawa dash. But he was already looking in that direction, already watching the man-made covered in emerge from the dark hole, followed by a veritable horde of villains. And Izuku didn't use the term villain idly here. Several of the people he saw were on wanted lists. Ironically, now that he was faced with real danger, the panicked siren in his head eased off slightly. Evidently, at least some of the strain had been fear of the unknown, and now the threat was very, very known in the worst way. That particular stressor was gone. There he is, cried the man covered in hands. All Might. The one we've all come for. Noma. Get him. A large villain with an exposed brain who practically sang with danger charged All Might, who grabbed him by the wrist and flung him away, towards the landslide zone. That's not much of a challenge. You'll have to do better than that, villains. Maybe, said a villain made of the same mist as the portal that had brought the others. The large villain came charging out of the landslide zone, none the worse for wear. Maybe not. You might be an elite player, but can you fight the boss and protect the noobs you're power leveling? The other villains surged forwards. This is when Mr. Aizawa and Ingenium jumped into the fray, and everything immediately got more chaotic. Izuku rapidly lost track of the multiple battles occurring around him, except, wow, Mr. Aizawa was really mowing through villains, wasn't he? That Nomu guy had to have a regeneration quirk. There was just no way. He'd have to write down that villain's monologue as soon as they got out. It might have clues. Izuku had no idea that Ingenium could fly, and wow, that gave him some ideas for Ida. Speaking of Ida, this is no time for analysis. Hurry up and evacuate. I won't allow that. Yeah, the Misty villain definitely had some kind of teleportation quirk, which made this whole thing even more gutsy. Quirks like that were always monitored by the government. These guys must not care about their identities. Greetings, he said, a metal collar slipping into place around his neck. We are the League of Villains. Forgive our audacity, but today we've come to dash. A gust of air from All Might's fight pushed the Mist villain back. But the move had left him partially unguarded, and Izuku watched helplessly as Nomu pounded a fist into his exposed side. Nomu knew about All Might's injury. No. Izuku didn't have time to process that, however, as Kirishima and Monoma jumped forward, attacking the Mist villain. The feeling of danger spiked, and Izuku barely registered Monoma's bewildered expression. Only students. But the best of the best. Yes, he was right to say you'd be a threat. Darkness spread like an ink stain from the villain's body. Darkness. And portals. Izuku slammed into Tsuyu and Kaminari, pushing them out of the way of forming portals. He wasn't able to do the same for himself. Begone, intoned the Mist villain, his voice echoing all around Izuku. Writhe in torment until you breathe your last. The next thing Izuku knew, he was in clear light and falling. From at least 2 stories up, over the flood zone. And then he stopped. The ghosts whipped their heads around to stare at Nana. She was sitting on a stool, hiding her face in her hands, though whether it was out of embarrassment or fear for Izuku was unclear. Nana, said Yoichi softly. I know, I'm sorry I saw him falling in Pawnee Dash. What did you do that for? Exclaimed Banjo. He was only 15, 20 meters up. Into water. That's twice as high as Olympic divers go. And they screw up their bodies all the time if they hit wrong. Shot back Nana, other emotions abandoned in favor of rage. Guys? Said Yoichi weakly. Who still watches the Olympics? Muttered In. If we had to give him a new quirk, it should have been a combat one. You're just jealous that he has float and not Black Whip. So what if I am? Demanded Banjo. If he had Black Whip, he wouldn't need that stupid grappling hook gun. So, you admit Black Whip is just a glorified grappling hook? Better than a glorified dash, he puffed out his cheeks. I'm going to give him Black Whip right now. And oh, shouted the other ghosts. Banjo, said N, what do you remember about people who all for one gave 3 quirks to? Banjo went pale. Oh hell, said Banjo. I'm sorry I got carried away. You can say that again, grumbled Nana. But, continued Banjo, doesn't this mean we can't give him the stockpile? They turned to Yoichi, who was far and away the expert on the stockpile quirk. He held up his hands and offered a sick, shaky smile. We've already started the process of giving him stockpile access. There's really no way to stop it. Nana started swearing, and even second and third looked tense. But that's borrowing trouble. Maybe he'll be compatible. With 3 quirks. It's possible, protested Yoichi. I mean he's got one for all? Maybe it's more like all for one than we thought. Disgusting. No. Absolutely not. Never say that again. But, again, that's a future problem unlike the villain attack, which is a now problem. I see what you're saying, said N, but we can't do anything about the villain attack, and we could theoretically do something about quirk troubles. Unless you'd rather watch helplessly while our latest possibly last holder is murdered. Yoichi sighed. Okay, yeah, let's take a look. Izuku's first thought was that Uraraka must have tagged him, but he had been way too far away from her for her to do that. Unless she had run at him when he dove for Tsuyu? Tsuyu had maybe sort of been between them. But, no, this didn't feel like Uraraka's quirk. He'd only experienced it a couple of times, but it felt like falling. This felt more like floating on the surface of a pool. He realized as he drifted helplessly upwards and slightly sideways, Shimura Nana's quirk. It would be really, really cool if the circumstances were different or if he had any control over the quirk whatsoever. As it was, he didn't appreciate the way he was getting progressively higher. Hitting the water at his previous height would have SCQD, but he probably would have survived. But not so much. So, if the quirk decided to stop as suddenly as it had started, he was doomed. Beyond doomed. He'd be dead. Wait. The grappling hook. He pulled it carefully out of its holster, making sure to wrap the loop around his wrist. He could get back to the ground with the grappling hook, anchor himself at a decent height and make use of this, or even attack, but if he dropped it, well, doom and all that. His best bet was the top of the downpour zone. It was the closest structure by far. He lined up his sights, fired, and watched as the hook fell several meters short. That was less than ideal. He rolled over and looked up. He wasn't that far from the ceiling. Danger sense screamed at him, and he was falling, just in time to miss getting hit by a jet of water from below. Izuku, naturally, started screaming as well and fired the grappling hook blindly. He rejoiced as a metallic thunk told him it had hit something and immediately hit the stop button, almost wrenching his shoulders out of their sockets. However, his joy quickly turned to horror as he realized he was now headed toward the hard, unforgiving side of the downpour zone at a dangerously high speed. He squeezed his eyes shut. Float turned back on. Izuku let out a somewhat pathetic whine in relief and hit the retract button on the grappling hook gun, letting it pull him up to the roof. From here, he had an acceptable view of the rest of the USJ. He shaded his eyes to look back at the main plaza and entrance. He could see Eraserhead and Ingenium fighting back to back in the central plaza. All Might and Nomu were tearing up trees in one of the forested areas, and near the entrance he could see 13 Ida, Uraraka, Shuji, Sato, Siro, and Ishido facing down the mist villain. Hopefully, with those numbers, they'd be able to get past him. Looking elsewhere, Izuku had to assume Todoroki was in the landslide zone, with the spiky ring of ice in the middle of it. He must be holding back. He could make out a fight happening in the mountain zone, but couldn't tell who was involved. That was more than half the class unaccounted for, including Tsuyu and Kaminari, who he'd thought he'd pushed away from portals. They were probably in the other zones, but he took a deep breath. Focus. Where would he do the most good? Danger sense couldn't tell him that right now, with all these bright threats all around him. He had to decide on his own. The fight in the mountain area wasn't going well. The number of visible villains was only increasing. Could Izuku get there? He bit his lip as he contemplated the distance, then jogged back to the opposite side of the downpour zone roof. Then he ran. Off the roof. Float activated at the top of the arc of his jump, and his momentum sent him tumbling forward towards the mountain zone. As he approached and began to slow, air resistance still being a thing, apparently, he was able to see Yaoyorozu and Jiro fighting for their lives. Yaoyorozu did not look good. This wasn't a great way to be proven right about her quirk having drawbacks. He aimed the grappling hook at one of the larger, closer villains, not really caring about how much damage it would do, and fired. Wow, said En. Kid definitely has a bit of a ruthless streak. Imagine how much better he'd do with Black Whip. He wouldn't have been able to get there in the first place without Float. Honestly, continued En, I don't get why second and third don't like him. They never shut up about Nana and eighth being too soft, after all. What? They said that stuff about me too? Yeah, I think they're just unsatisfiable at this point. It's annoying. I was much more violent and ruthless than Toshi though. I know. Yoichi, said Hikage. I'm not seeing any sign of additional stress on Ninth's body. That's because Izuku is the best. Or, said En, it's because he's only had Nana's quirk for, 5, 10 minutes, tops. Or because he's the best. Just look at how he's helped his friends defeat all those villains. Compelling argument, said Hikage. What now? Asked Yaoyorozu, holding herself up with one of her staffs. The mountain zone was littered with various weapons and shrapnel from Yaoyorozu's quirk use. This included a cannon, which was really cool but seemed a bit over the top. And maybe not the most efficient thing to make, considering Yaoyorozu's limitations. I don't know, admitted Izuku. He'd been flung around the field as a makeshift flail bola by the girls a few times, and was a little dizzy. He looked back out at the battles still taking place in the plaza. Maybe we should go down and make our way around the edge to the entrance. We could pick up Todoroki and see if there's anyone in the ruins zone who needs help. Then he saw the hand villain step forward, facing down Eraserhead as Ingenium was lured away in defense of Tsuyu and Kaminari, who had just run out of the wooded area, trailing villains. Danger flared in his mind's eye, and for the second time in his life, his body moved by itself. As much of a disaster as this was, it would have been about 1,000 times worse without Tensei there. The Nomu guy had All Might pinned down, and as terrifying as that was, it was only made worse by how little he reacted to Shoyuta erasing his quirk whenever he caught sight of him. No wonder Midoriya had been a wreck this morning. If nothing else, this confirmed his quirk was some kind of precognitive danger detection, and Shoyuta fully intended to get it registered as such the minute they got out of this mess, so that the next time Midoriya showed up shaking in his red shoes, they could hit the problem with an army. The hand-covered villain started reciting numbers. What was he doing? Counting something? Time? Shoyuta blinked. The villain said a new number. Well, the BS tier D was measuring the length of time he could keep his quirk active. Distantly, because he was currently fighting about a dozen villains and really needed to keep his attention on not dying, Shoyuta registered an approaching young scream. Then something thunked into the fountain, and a line, a carbon fiber cable, appeared between Shoyuta and the hand villain, giving them both pause. The pause lasted just long enough for 2 pairs of red shoes to plow into the side of the hand villain's head. The momentum of impact took both Midoriya and the hand villain into the fountain. Then the fountain disintegrated. Shoyuta turned his quirk back on, and Midoriya log rolled away from the remains of the fountain. "Get out of here," ordered Shoyuta. "Yes, sir," said Midoriya, scrambling to his feet and managing to dodge several villains' attacks in a way that looked both natural and uncanny. Shoyuta refocused on the hand villain, who could evidently disintegrate things by touching them. What a joy! A completely terrible matchup for close-range fighters like himself and Tensei. Or All Might, for that matter. As Shoyuta strategized, part of his brain filed the question of how Midoriya had gotten there for later. It would be best to restrain him while he was still disoriented. Then the portal villain was there, between him and the disintegration villain. Shoyuta found himself falling. Izuku did not reach Ingenium in time to stop him from being pinned by the tree. Not that he'd known Nomu would throw a tree that way, but he'd been more than aware that something bad was going to happen. From what Izuku had seen so far, All Might had been trying to keep his fight with Nomu away from others while still occasionally throwing an assist. But Nomu was strong. If Izuku didn't know better, he'd say the villain had multiple quirks. Except maybe he didn't know better. Here was Izuku with 2 quirks, after all. Who was to say there couldn't be another quirk like One for All? That could be bad. Judging by the way All Might's direct attacks and punches barely moved Nomu but throws seemed to work normally, in addition to a regeneration quirk, Izuku would say he had something else that absorbed impact. And then possibly a strength quirk? All Might and Nomu rolled out of the trees. All Might was ever so slightly bloodied. Nomu looked unscathed. It would be a gamble, All Might probably had already realized it, but knowledge was power. Izuku cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "All Might! I think he has more than one quirk." Black bled into the air. "You certainly are a golden egg, aren't you?" The mist villain and the hand villain were there. The hand villain, who bore a strong resemblance to a drowned rat, cackled. "You've been trying to seal his movements, haven't you?" he said, voice scratchy. "But it's no good, he's just as powerful as you. Nomu, our specially made multi-quirked anti-All Might weapon. Kurogyri." "Yes, Shigaraki Tamura." More portals started to form, and Izuku started to get a better, horrible idea of what the villain's goal here was. He needed Ingenium and Kaminari. He edged away, then turned to run. He couldn't directly help All Might right now, but if All Might could just hold out a little longer. He grabbed Kaminari and Tsuyu's hands. "Help me get Ingenium free. I have a plan." "You have a plan, Midoriya?" asked Ingenium. "Why yeah," said Midoriya. We have to get this off of you for it to work dash. Explain to me as you go. Well dash. Multiple quirks, said N quietly. No. Toshinori killed him. Never thought he was human enough to die dash, started Banjo. Please tell me you aren't quoting pre-quirk literature at us right now, said N. Yuichi? Asked Taikich. The ghosts shifted their attention to their first member. You don't seem very surprised, observed Nana. I guess it's like Banjo said Yoichi with a pained smile. I just never really felt like it was over. Even if I didn't think he'd attack Izuku of all people. Well, he isn't. Clearly he sent his goons after Toshinori. But why wouldn't you think he'd go after Ninth as soon as he realized Toshi passed on One for All? Asked Nana, putting her hands on her hips. Probably because it doesn't look like he has One for All, suggested N. Oh, said Nana. Yeah. Good point. Izuku didn't miss the pain that flickered across Ingenium's face as he stood, or the way he was clearly favoring one side of his body, but they didn't have a lot of options right now. This was the best they could do. All Might was still avoiding the portals, and Nomu reaching through them, but he'd had to abandon his cape. Worse, he was still obviously worried about the four of them, and had left himself open to injury to knock small fry villains away from them multiple times as they levered the tree off Ingenium. They didn't have time. They didn't have options. This would be a great time for reinforcements from the school to arrive. They didn't. Izuku handed the spooled-out end of the grappling hook to Ingenium, and the gun end to Kaminari. Tsuyu wrapped her tongue around Izuku and they jumped away, out of range. Then Ingenium took off, compensating for less move output on his injured side. He was wobbly, and the hand villain easily dodged him, but the mist villain with his focus on the portals, didn't. Ingenium slammed the points of the grappling hook into the man's metal collar, and ran. Lightning struck, racing down the conductive cable from Kaminari to the mist villain. The man convulsed, the portals snapping shut. One of them snapped shut on Nomu. The villain's arm flopped onto the ground, and Izuku swallowed hard. That could have been All Might if they hadn't timed that right. Nomu roared, but its muscles bulged, and its arm, rapidly, disgustingly, grew back. They'd gotten rid of the portal threat, but what now? Nomu and the hand villain were still very much threats, and if the hand villain got even one hand on All Might, it was game over. Third cursed, surprising everyone. Ooh, are you finally acknowledging Izuku's superior skill in strategy and quirk analysis? Asked Yoichi, striking a pose. No, said Third, stepping away from the wall. You can keep him to yourself. I just don't want Eighth to die. He walked over to the fiery form that was Yagi Toshinori's placeholder in the mindscape. He's still connected. Well yeah, said Yoichi. What are you doing? I'm giving him FA gene. What? He can do that, demanded Banjo. What about Black Whip? How the hell would Toshinori explain Black Whip? Give it a rest already. Third put his hands on Eighth's shoulders. Midoriya. Monoma. Izuku staggered as Monoma dropped both hands on his shoulders. What? The portal villain, said Monoma, eyes wide. He has multiple quirks. It's true, said Kirishima, running up behind him. After we were zapped to the ruin zone, Monoma was able to do all sorts of stuff. So, he's like Nomu? That thing has multiple quirks too? Normally, calling someone with a quirk that affected their appearance a thing was frowned upon, but in this case they were all going to let it slide. Yeah, said Izuku. A terrible idea began to rise up in his mind. But then he was distracted by Kaminari starting to wander towards the fight. I think it has 3, he said in a rush. Regen, strength, and shock absorption if you can think of anything dash, he cut off. We need to get Kaminari. I've got him, said Kirishima quickly. I can take a hit. Izuku nodded. Midoriya, Ingenium, said Tsuyu with a gasp. Ingenium had collapsed, clutching one of his legs. Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes. There was too much going on. A wave of ice crusted over Nomu. Todoroki. All Might took advantage of his opponent's temporary incapacitation and leaped back to where Izuku and the others were, grabbing Kirishima, Kaminari, and Ingenium on the way. You kids need to get out of here. But the shock absorption dash. Geez, plain kid, what are you, some kind of exposition dump? Asked the hand villain, scratching his neck. A secret gimmick boss? He laughed. Yeah, Nomu has shock absorption. Like I said, Nomu ripped itself free of the ice. He's a specially made living sandbag, a damage sponge just for . The hand villain cut off as a floating tree branch hit him over the back of the head, knocking free one of his costume hands. He staggered but didn't fall, swiping behind him with one hand. One of his own hands, that was. Hagakure yelped. Not really thinking, Izuku picked up a rock and threw it at the hand villain, who caught and disintegrated it. That's it, you hero brats. He was blown back by a gust of wind. Go, urged All Might. Shock absorption quirks always have limits. So do regeneration quirks. So did All Might. If I could touch him, started Monoma. If I could touch you, Go, repeated All Might more urgently. You heard him, Setsu. Running away? Taunted the hand villain. Then, more quietly but still audible, wake up, Kurogyri. All Might smiled grimly. Not at all, he said. Then he charged the Nomu. The silver lining to being shipped express to the location of one of the most traumatic events in his life was that Shoyuda had cell service. He could call UA. Literally everything else SE. Nizu, he croaked into the receiver. Attack . On the USJ. I gathered reinforcements when the computer system stopped returning my pings and I couldn't contact you or 13. What is your, oh dear, how did you get all the way out there? One of the villains has a warp quirk, said Shoyuda. He shifted and hissed. Dropped me from over a story up. Probably more like 2. Or even 3. Kinda wanna know why he dropped me here. I'm sending an ambulance your way, said Nizu brusquely. There's also a guy who can turn stuff to dust with a touch, got me a couple times, but only got my skin, and really, muscly guy. Fighting All Might. Lots of cannon fodder. My kids . You've done everything you can. Focus on not dying. You were always one of my favorite students. I'd hate to lose you. I'm a teacher. And? That's Ida Tenyo on the road. Is he okay? Somewhat winded, but unharmed. Anything else we should know? One of the villains was going toe-to-toe with All Might, said Shoyuda, blinking black spots out of his eyes. The leader had a 5-point disintegration quirk, got me a couple times, just lost some skin though. He inhaled deeply and groaned at the distinct sensation of a cracked rib. Kids were scattered. Don't know where they all were. Saw Midoriya. He took another gasp of air. I think 13 was injured. He could hear sirens. I think, he said weakly, that's... No, there were a lot of cannon fodder guys. Did I say that already? I think that's it. Thank you, Shoyuda. I'm going to leave you on speaker. If you can think of anything else, let us know. We need to debrief Ida, now. Itchin, said Shoyuda. By the time All Might punched Nomu through the roof of the USJ, the hand villain was shaking the mist villain vigorously, and Izuku and his classmates were halfway to the exit, carrying Ingenium and Kaminari. Izuku was relieved, despite the danger still hanging in the air. It couldn't have been more than 30 minutes since this all started, but it was probably shorter, and Izuku knew All Might had all his time for today. With Nomu gone, there was no way All Might would lose. Not even to someone with a destructive 5-point quirk. Izuku could write a whole article on his reasoning, with sources cited. All Might flipped a cube out of his pocket, and it unfolded into a pair of HNDCFFs designed specifically for restraining people with 5-point quirks. It was obvious that the hand villain wasn't going to come quietly. The mist villain's yellow eyes opened groggily. All Might moved. Too slow. The hand villain and the mist villain were gone. The other villains who had come with them, however, were still very present. Which is why Izuku would maintain until he died. He passed out when the rest of the teachers stepped through the door of the USJ and he finally felt safe. Shoyuda watched as the 2 villain leaders stumbled out of a portal not far from him. He had the presence of mind to silence his phone, but couldn't focus enough to do much else. Hopefully Nizu still recorded all his calls, the paranoid rodent. Kurogyri, growled the hand villain. Where the hell are we and why are we here? The mist villain Kurogiri? Shook his head slowly. I am unsure, Shigaraki Tamura. I do not recognize the area. His voice was unsteady and itched at Shuta's brain. I suspect that the electric attack of that student has damaged my quirk control. Then get it undamaged, idiot. Goddamn son. We're out in the open. I can hear sirens. I believe that those are ambulance sirens. Police sirens have a different pitch dash. I don't care. Open a portal back home. I am uncertain if that is dash. Take us back to the bar. Now. The villains left again, all without noticing Shoyuta. Maybe they were just desensitized to corpses lying in dark alleys or something. Not that he was a corpse yet. Even if his eyes were sliding closed. What an illogical affair. This was a stupid place to die. All right, said N, in a tone that indicated he wanted attention. Now that Ninth is no longer in danger of immediate death, I think we have some things to talk about. Firstly, Yoichi, I have a question for you. Yoichi looked resigned. Ask away then. Before I ask it, I just want to preface that I've always had the utmost respect for you, and obviously there's nothing you can do to act on it from in here, but I can't help but notice that you seem unusually attached to Ninth. Yoichi gestured for N to continue. So, have to ask. Yoichi, are you a Pefli? No, I'm not a Pefli. Like I said, you seem unusudash. I'm his uncle. What? Said Nana. What? Said Banjo, not quite at the same time. Not that I'm not pleased I won't have to figure out a way to double murder you, but what? Demanded N. I can't believe you thought I was a Pefli. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with him? Said Banjo, phantom representations of Black Whip peeling off his body. What's wrong with you? How are you Ninth's uncle? In the usual way, shouted Yoichi, who seemed to have gotten stuck on high volume. I'm actually kind of shocked none of you noticed right away. How could we possibly have noticed? Demanded Banjo. I noticed, said Haikich. Wait, what really? Yoichi turned to Haikich. Yes, said Haikich gravely. All for One was in the family photo on the wall in Ninth's house. The one in the living room. I thought we were just avoiding the subject to be polite. Haikich, said Nana, I cannot begin to tell you how much that wasn't what was going on. Is that why you two were sulking? She asked Third. We aren't sulking. We're protesting the ridiculous decision to give One for All to the son of All for One. And I'm going right back to it. Bah, said Yoichi, waving him off. Go sulk in your corner. You're just jealous that Izuku is the coolest One for All holder. En's eyes had narrowed suspiciously. Those two were sulking way before we were in Ninth, let alone his house. When did they find out? Like, the day after Eighth met him. I told them because I wanted advice, but I got sulking instead. See if I tell them any more secrets, ever. That was a year ago, said Nana. How in the world did you know, anyway? He looks just like Hisashi did at that age, said Yoichi. Also, he always said that if he had kids, he'd name them Tamura and Izuku, so. Ninth looks like his mother, though, said Nana. Yeah, and All for One is a grade A narcissist, said Yoichi. You're saying he picked, what was her name, Inko? He picked Inko because she looked like him? Asked Nana. Yeah, essentially. Wait, back up, said Banjo. Tamura? Did you say Tamura? Yeah. That's what the mist guy called the hand guy that one time. Actually, didn't All for One go by Shigaraki for a while there too? The only audible sound was a heart rate monitor's muffled beep. Presumably from Ninth being hooked up to One. That's messed up, said Yoichi, finally. There wasn't much else to say. Banjo took Haikich to the side while the other ghosts were still wading through their existential crisis. Man, he said, Haikich bro. You know I love you. You do. At least 85% of the time. Continue. But next time you think one of us has a secret relative out there, you've got to say something so we don't get blindsided. You're sure? Positive. Alright then. I couldn't help but notice that both Ninth's mother and Tamura share a strong resemblance to Nana. I've changed my mind. Although Midoriya Inko had abandoned the tech conference as soon as she heard about the attack on the USJ, she, unlike the Mist villain, could not teleport. Therefore, Izuku was stuck in the nurse's office even after he had woken up and paramedics had confirmed that his injuries began and ended at bruises and quirk exhaustion. And a potentially fractured bone in his foot, but that wasn't worth mentioning. Sitting next to the police officer with nothing to do was awkward. Very awkward. His hands itched for his notebooks, but everything they brought to the USJ was evidence, and he hadn't been allowed to go back to the classroom. He wanted to know what happened to his classmates and Mr. Aizawa, who he hadn't seen since he ran away from the plaza and left him with the hand villain, and Mr. Yagi, who had really taken a beating from Nomu. Danger Sense was quiet, relatively speaking, but Float was just waiting to be used and tested. Plus, he really had to talk to Mr. Yagi about that. Loads of his classmates had seen him use Float. How was he supposed to explain having Float right after telling them he probably had a sensory quirk? Plus, if he got Float, it stood to reason that he'd get all the other one for all users' quirks as well. So he had to figure out how to make Danger Sense, Float, Smokescreen, Black Whip, and a Strength Enhancement all look like the same quirk. Which, maybe they were, technically, considering that Monoma had sensed One for All as a single quirk, but whatever was going on with the Mist villain as multiple quirks. Point was, One for All definitely functioned as multiple quirks. Would his friends think he was lying? No, he'd definitely proven Danger Sense existed by predicting, however loosely, the attack. Hey, Tamakawa. Izuku and the officer looked up at one of the detectives who had come to take initial statements. His name was Tsukachi. Izuku thought. Mr. Yagi, as Mr. Yagi, was standing behind him. I can take it from here. I have a few more questions for Midoriya. Yes, sir. Midoriya. He nodded at them as he left the room. How are you feeling, young Midoriya? Asked Mr. Yagi, taking the officer's spot with a slight groan. Better than this morning, actually, he said. But what about you? That Nomu guy kept, His eyes trailed towards the detective. Ah, this is Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. He's an old friend of mine. He knows. Well, just about everything about me. Izuku nodded slowly. So, he knows about, I know about One for All, said Tsukachi. Oh, said Izuku. He rapidly gathered together his thoughts, trying to decide what the most important piece of information he had to impart was. Do you know what happened to Mr. Aizawa? And Ingenium? That was most definitely not a piece of information. Stupid brain. The portal villain, Kurogyri, teleported Aizawa off UA grounds, but he was able to get help quickly after that. Ingenium had some injuries that need a specialist, so he went home. They'll be alright, but they'll probably have to take a few days off. Yes, said Tsukachi, giving Mr. Yagi one of the driest looks Izuku had ever seen. Because you heroes are so good about that. Teaching isn't exactly strenuous, Naomasa. Remind me again how you got injured this time. Mr. Yagi made a face Izuku would have found hilarious under other circumstances. That's different, he said, plaintively. Is it though? Mr. Yagi coughed. Now, Midoriya, my boy. I'm sure you have things you want to talk about. I think I glimpsed you soaring through the air earlier. Did you unlock the enhancement aspect of One for All? No, said Izuku. Not exactly. Well, said Mr. Yagi, that's certainly something. Sorry, said Izuku. You have nothing to apologize for, my boy, said Mr. Yagi, patting his knee. In fact, it's a good thing that you got Float this time. I'd be at a loss about what to do with Smokescreen or Black Whip. But I'm fairly familiar with my master's quirk, and, well, there's someone else who I should get back into contact with. Mr. Yagi forced the words out as if they physically pained him to say. Which they might have. He did have the whole coughing thing. Maybe he was just trying to hold one back? Mr. Yagi? Are you okay? I'm fine. Okay, are you sure? He wasn't sure if he wanted to bring the next part up if Mr. Yagi wasn't feeling well. Yes, said Mr. Yagi. I just history. Izuku nodded. So, did you hear Monoma say that the mist guy, Kurogyri? Had multiple quirks, too? Like Nomu? The mood plummeted. Yes, said Tsukachi. He told me and I told Tashinori. It appears that Kurogyri's warp quirk is actually several different quirks working as one. Merged together, almost. Izuku nodded. I was just wondering. One for all can be passed on, so are there other quirks like that? Like, if the first person with one for all had family members or something? Or... Izuku trailed off. Mr. Yagi now looked actively ill. Did I say something wrong? Tashinori, said Tsukachi, you mean you didn't tell him already? In my defense, I thought he was extremely dead. What? Who are you talking about? My boy. I think it's time to tell you a story of two brothers. So, one for all comes with a built-in nemesis? Who may be immortal? That he's not. Mr. Yagi bowed his head. It would appear so. I am somehow both surprised and not. There's one more thing I wanted to ask you about before your mother arrives, said Mr. Yagi. Please tell me it's not something worse, like me being a descendant of the guy, requested Izuku, picking the worst, most ridiculous thing he could think of. Tsukachi snorted, then covered the noise up with a cough. I seriously doubt that all for one could maintain a romantic relationship of any kind, said Mr. Yagi, and even if you were, it wouldn't really matter. I mean, his own brother hated his guts. That's a bit extreme, murmured Yoichi. Considering some of the rants we've gotten you to go on, said En, it really isn't. Maybe, maybe not. But the rest of it dash. Yoichi promptly left to harass second and third. How can you two be so close and yet so far? Mourned Nana. How are you so smart and so dumb at the same time? In Ninth's defense, said En, he doesn't know what all for one looks like. Surely he knows what his father looks like. He sees his picture almost every day, said Hikage. Admittedly, I could have phrased that better, but are you rubbing that in, or are you serious? I've known you for like half a century and I still can't tell. Despite the example being a joke, Izuku felt much better after hearing that. But no, this subject is relatively neutral and nothing so dramatic. I was hoping to get your permission to tell young Aizawa about one for all. Izuku opened and closed his mouth several times. Echa? And why do you want my permission? You don't need my permission. One for all is your quirk now, said Yagi, and your secret. It's up to you who knows about it. Outside of an emergency, I suppose. As for why in general. Mr. Yagi sighed. There are things young Aizawa needs to know about the villains with multiple quirks and all for one. I can't tell you the details right now, but with how one for all is manifesting in you, if he only knows about all for one, it would be very easy for him to make incorrect assumptions. Oh, said Izuku. He could certainly see how that could be dangerous. He didn't want his teacher to associate him with a villain like that. Also, if he knows what's happening, it will be easier for him to help you, finished Mr. Yagi hopefully. Izuku thought about it. I guess that would be alright. But he's not the only person who'll know about my quirk being weird and all for one, right? I mean, the Hero Commission at least. To be entirely honest with you, I tell the HPSC as little as possible about all for one and one for all. What? Why? Asked Izuku. Well dash. Izuku. Mom. I'll explain later, said All Might quickly. Kurogyri passed a damp washcloth over the burns on his neck. The metal of his collar was a conductor, and the charge the young man with the electricity quirk had sent through it had been significant. It was only natural for it to get hot, for it to burn. He should go to the doctor. Some of the collar's functionality seemed to be damaged. He brushed his mist-covered fingers over the cool metal. Tamura wouldn't tell the doctor. Kurogyri cared deeply for Tamura, but the young man was certainly shallow and unlikely to realize the extent of Kurogyri's injuries. He was more likely to focus on his own, not insignificant, wounds. In contrast to those, Kurogyri's paled. He wasn't nearly as important as Tamura, after all. It should be fine to let his wounds and the collar be. It would do what it was supposed to and protect the vulnerable areas of his body, internal damage or no. He just had to be careful of the burns becoming infected, especially since he couldn't see them. Sometimes, he wished his body was like it was before. Kurojairi frowned at the thought even as it faded from his consciousness. He had been created by all for one fully formed. His body had always been like this, hadn't it? Shoyuta had been in and out of consciousness the past few hours. Apparently he'd never been in serious danger of dying, except from shock, which was just his body being dramatic and didn't count. All his major organs were free of serious damage. He just had to regain his stamina so that Recovery Girl could heal him up, and then he'd be fine. Unlike Tensei, apparently, who had cracked one of his engines, which needed specialist help and surgery to realign the pieces. Or All Might, who had taken hits to his old injury and needed to take time off or lose more time from his hero form. Or his students, who hadn't been seriously injured but who were probably traumatized. The last time he had woken up, though, Hizashi had been there. Now, All Might, Nizu, and Detective Tsukachi were there. Thought I already gave my statement, said Shoyuta. You did, said Tsukachi. We're here to give you more information about the attack, I'm afraid, said Nizu. Information I won't like? It can wait until you feel better, of course. That's illogical, said Shoyuta. The sooner I get the information, the more time I have to process it. All Might Yagi said. Nomu and the portal-using villain both had multiple quirks. Shoyuta frowned. You mean they had quirks with multiple aspects? No, said Nizu. As Yagi said, they had multiple quirks. This was confirmed by both the villain's comments and by Monoma, who made contact with the portal villain and was able to copy multiple quirks. Kurojairi, said Shoyuta. That's what the other one called him. Shigaraki. Nizu nodded. Indeed. We weren't sure you had heard that. He tapped his paws together. What we are about to tell you is classified. We are only sharing it with you because of your unique position and history. In the wrong hands, it could cause a lot of damage, said Yagi. Only two things kept Shoyuta from leaping out the window and escaping. The fact that he was basically immobilized in plaster casts and the fact that his students were already involved in whatever this was. Great. What is it? To begin, said Tsukachi, Monoma said he was able to copy 3 quirks from Kurojairi. That's up from what he could do before, observed Shoyuta. Stress did push quirks to improve, sometimes, although Shoyuta hated for the improvement to be associated with trauma. Tsukachi nodded. He made note of that as well. He said he picked up a quirk that allowed him to turn his body parts into portals that led to other body parts. A quirk allowed him to temporarily teleport his body parts, and he trailed off. And a quirk that at the very least bears a strong resemblance to Shirakumo Oboro's cloud. What are you saying? Asked Shoyuta, ignoring the way his heart had almost stopped. At the moment? Only that it is very strange that Kurojairi had a quirk like that, and sent you to the place where Shirakumo Oboro died. Oboro would never dash. We're not saying that, interrupted Yagi. He coughed into his hand. There's more context. Have you ever heard of the quirk Bogeyman? I can't wait to never sleep again on my entire life, said Shoyuta. Wait, said Tsukachi, it gets worse. How could it get worse? Naomesa, you're supposed to be on my side, complained Yagi. I am. That's why I'll stop Eraserhead here from trying to kill you after you finish explaining. Well, it has to do with young Midoriya's quirk. Let me get this straight. You gave the quirk with an immortal supervillain archenemy attached to a child. And didn't tell him that the supervillain existed. When you say it like that, it sounds really bad dash. It is really bad dash. If I'd known he was still alive dash. What part of immortal do you not understand? Shoyui too believed that all for one dash. Shut up Nizu. I don't have the energy to be mad at both of you right now. Yagi, Tsukachi, and Nizu were all shown out by an irate nurse while a different but equally irate nurse replaced the plaster cast on Shuta's arm. It had definitely been worth it. Just because school was cancelled, that didn't mean training was cancelled. Except it did, both because Inko was too stressed to let Izuku out of the house, and because Mr. Yagi had a meeting to go to about the attack. But the second day after the attack was a different story. That morning, Mr. Yagi pulled up in front of Izuku's apartment in Hercules, still so cool, and picked him up. Izuku bounced enthusiastically into the car and then froze. Oh my gosh, what happened to your eye? Was it a villain? How hard did they hit you? His hands fluttered. I have some cream dash. Oh, said Mr. Yagi, no need, young Midoriya. I sort of deserved it. It's a sort of reminder to take it easy too. People would be disturbed to see All Might with a black eye, after all. He smiled, then winced. Are you sure? You should buckle up, my boy. All right, said Izuku. So, where are we going? You said there was someone you wanted to introduce me to. Yes, said Mr. Yagi. My old teacher. It's been a while since I've seen him. Hopefully he won't make up for lost time with a kick to the face. What? Don't worry about it. When Mr. Yagi spent most of the way over muttering about kicks to the face and head, Izuku decided that he should, in fact, worry about it. The broken-down building was not what Izuku had been expecting. Are you sure this is the right place? Asked Izuku. Absolutely, said Mr. Yagi, who was shaking somewhat. This Pavlovian response only confirms it. The building looked condemned. Maybe he moved. One can only hope, said Mr. Yagi. Maybe I have to see this through. He steeled himself visibly, squaring shoulders. Please not a kick to the face, he said under his breath. Is he really that bad? Asked Izuku. My boy, I guarantee you that he's worse. Poor kid has no idea what's coming, said Banjo. Although we wouldn't have believed it either if we weren't riding along and watching. Nana, said En, I just want to reiterate that I'm very glad you never thought about giving one for all to Gran Torino. Come on. Sorahiko isn't that bad, protested Nana. We know, said everyone else. He's worse. They walked up to the apartment building door. Mr. Yagi sighed heavily on seeing the door was hanging open, which was a radically different reaction than what Izuku would have expected. Is Danger Sense doing anything? I don't think so. Let me know if that changes. All right, said Izuku. Mr. Yagi pushed the door in, and Izuku followed cautiously after him. They went down a few hallways, peeking in rooms. Then they got to the kitchen, and Izuku covered his mouth with both hands with a gasp at the grisly, bloody scene. Gran Torino laid on the floor in a pool of red liquid. Oh my gosh, he's dash. At the same time, Mr. Yagi said, at least it's not a KIC dash. The supposedly dead hero was suddenly airborne, and flying towards Mr. Yagi, foot first. Specifically at his face. You thou dash. Danger Sense spiked. It was a tiny spike, but still. Izuku reacted. Specifically, with nerves shot by the USJ attack, he reacted violently, lashing out with a fist, swatting Gran Torino out of the air and back into the puddle of what was, in retrospect, probably diluted ketchup. For a moment, everything was silent. Oh my gosh, wailed Izuku. I assaulted a senior citizen. Gran Torino bounced back to his feet. I like this kid, Tashinori,